Hello, has-beens and never-wases once more. This is Hotel Guy 912, springing upon you the all-in-one version as was promised. Like with how I handled the all-in-one version of Wednesday, I have cut out the preamble to part 1 in service of my own preamble here, as I don't need to reiterate the matter of which I was going about tackling this show, as you would already know by now. Now, while I was in plans towards making the AIO version, I was not merely satisfied with the idea of cutting the parts from the head and toes and stitching them together as you would a human centipede and being done with it, as I noticed that in all the excitement of making these parts, that my watermark was getting in the way of the subtitles I was attempting to show you all. So what I did was not only go back and re-render the sections of these parts with watermark considerably more transparent, but I've also added extra snippets and context that I neglected to mention at the time of making them. I've also retuned some of the audio, as I did get some comments about some of the background music being equally as loud as my own voice, so take the AIO version as a more definitive version of the 4 parts as a whole. And with that, let's check in on this has-been of a show-tell once more. We start Hazbin Hotel with a opening monologue, loosely following the creation of heaven and Adam and Lilith as opposed to Adam and Eve from the Bible. And is it me, or does the opening of this show sort of remind me of a certain pony-themed show that came out in 2014? Anyhow, the inciting incident that kicked off the conflict, if you will, between heaven and what will become hell is that Lucifer had ideas of grandeur that the beings of heaven felt were too dangerous to be entertained. We'll leave that note for later. Anyhow, we gotta address the first human settlers that the angels created, as opposed to just God himself in this story. The first and notable problem with this monologue that came to my attention is that, in spite of the angels having created Adam and Lilith with the express purpose of there being a perfect equality, that Adam wanted control over Lilith without any outside influence to motivate that decision. This is usually the problem with creationist theory, is that any inherent flaw in the design of something must be done so arbitrarily as, if I were to make a clock that only counted 1 second every other second, what would be the reason for me doing such a thing? Even applying creation theory to our modern day inventions, no human intentionally makes something flawed, and even if they do, there is at least a cynical justification for it. Why and how could Adam have feelings of contempt and authority unless the angels designed him that way? And why would they knowingly designed him that way if their intentions are to set up a perfect equality? And this is important for what will be the inevitable creation of hell, as, through this fierce independence, as the show calls it, Lucifer sees Lilith as the opportunity to make his dreams come true through giving Eve, Adam's second wife, the forbidden fruit of knowledge. Okay, second problem. If Lilith is already fiercely independent, as the show states, and that presumably the angels designed her this way, what would giving Eve the forbidden fruit of knowledge change exactly? Because the premise behind giving the fruit of knowledge is an extension of the ability to have free will, something Lilith wouldn't have by this part of the monologue if we apply creation theory to its fullest extent. Unless for some reason the angels acquiesce to Adam having a more submissive woman, which further calls into question their intentions for there being a perfect equality in this earth. Would this make any sense to do? Now, of course, all this monologue is being told to us through Charlie, the daughter of Lilith and Lucifer, and for all we know, she was told this is how the events unfolded by them, who would do a lot to paint their side as righteous and the angels in heaven in the wrong. But unfortunately, this description about Adam and the angels will ring more true the farther we get into this show. Because Eve was given the forbidden fruit, evil was able to creep its way into earth, and thus hell was created. Because of this deceit by Lucifer and by Lilith, the angels exiled them into their own very creation, all the while stunting Lucifer's means of which to see the virtues of humanity, making him crestfallen. However, Lilith seemed to greatly benefit from this punishment, using her voice to grow the masses of hell. And because of this influx of hell's influence spreading, heaven made the executive choice to begin yearly purgings to keep hell's power in check. Now, that was a lot of exposition to take in, which this show desperately needs considering what it uses its time on, so now I can tackle a bit of the nitty-gritty surrounding it. So one immediate problem that will not ever get brought up is, if Lilith was the source of hell's burgeoning power, wouldn't it make more sense for heaven to permanently eradicate Lilith if their main concern was of hell domineering over heaven? You know, can't kill a weed if you don't cut it by the root. Also, if Lilith was exiled to hell as a mortal being, how exactly did she gain these kinds of powers in the first place? Am I to believe that heaven accidentally gave her that as a consequence of exiling her to begin with? Because that doesn't seem totally contrived at all now, does it? As for the purgings, there will be a problem with their explicit application of them going in, but currently the issue with them that I notice is that if hell's purpose isn't to damn sinners into a state of perpetual torment, then what is its purpose? Because to me, it seems hell isn't so much hell as a diet purgatory, or mayhaps a test to see if the sinners would continue to perpetuate their vices even after death on earth, and then give them the final punishment. But that's also assuming the angels actually have a metric for who deserves to go to heaven or not. And boy, we will get to that, won't we? After the monologue, we are thusly introduced to Charlie and by extension the rest of the staff at the Hazbin Hotel, who is currently the torchbearer of Lucifer's dream to see the good in humanity through the sinners. Although, confusingly, the monologue and Charlie's first line out of monologue describe it as Lilith's dream, when it seems Lilith is perfectly content to let the sinners run rampant in her domain. I should also mention that we will never see Lilith in person until the very tip end of the show, which makes it all the more perplexing that the show frames this motivation as hereditary to her, when sprinkled out in this show it's very likely that Lilith doesn't want what Charlie is having. But we can get to writing the show for the writers later on. To supplant this absence of Lilith, Charlie and Vaggie talk about what's on Charlie's mind currently, which inevitably brings up Lilith, to which Charlie states that she hasn't seen her in the last 7 years. Keep this dated note considering a certain other character has also been noticeably absent for that same amount of time. Will get lampshaded as the episodes go by, but anyhow, the two go downstairs to see what Alistair, the resident overlord who for possibly ulterior reasons has come to help their enterprise, has in store for them. I should also mention that if you hadn't seen the pilot in the lead up to watching the show prior, a lot of this information I'm giving you is going to give you tonal whiplash. Yeah, get used to that, as the show's breakneck pace does not do it a service to follow along with the events unfolding. But the current continuity is that episode 1 of this show takes place roughly 5 days after the pilot, so presumably Alistair and the gang he cropped up have done a bit of tidying up around the place. Although, tidying up is putting it mildly, as Alistair's ad regarding Hazbin is completely tongue-in-cheek, while having all the subtlety of acid on your face about our main protagonist's conceits as a character. More on that conceit as we go on. Anyhow, Vaggie is a bit upset about Alistair's plug for Hazbin Hotel, while Charlie tries to play nice with her criticisms of it, setting up the dynamic of these two as the sword and shield of the hotel respectively. Apparently, the only reason Alistair took the piss on their advertisement was the medium of which they wanted to showcase it, as he has a hatred for TV and digital hardware, as it will be expressed through his rivalry with Vox, another overlord in episode 2. While this may come off as incredibly petty for an overlord who used to be top dog in hell, there once again may be a ulterior motive behind what he's doing, but at the same time, I can't excuse a character acting out of character as, they actually have another scheme in motion, every single time, or else you get shit like Disney's Star Wars interpretation of Admiral Thrawn. Through this exchange, Angel Dust, the porn star currently using this hotel as a means of escape from his demons, suggests using his more sultry ways as a selling point of the hotel, to which Vaggie shuts down. This will become tonally dissonant, like a lot of things in this show, with how I'm supposed to feel about a character acting a certain way, but throughout, Angel Dust plays extremely coy with his verbiage to the point of sexual assault with certain characters, yet simultaneously is presented as a tortured soul of those very things he's doing right now. I get this will be better presented as a smokescreen, but I'm not sure presenting a victim of circumstance inflicting the very things he was a victim of is exactly the message you want to present to me. But simultaneously, this show wishes you had the memory of a goldfish to forget what it just outlined as horrible to justify something else happening later on. And we will, of course, get to that later on. Angel objectifies himself to oblivion up until Charlie gets a surprise call from her dad. Before we can figure out what he's calling her for, Angel Dust brings up a good question that if Alistair is as powerful as he claims, then couldn't he forcibly relocate sinners to the hotel? But this explanation gets interrupted by Husk, arguably the best character in the show, although best isn't saying much for what we have to work with, saying that he's here by decree of Alistair and nothing more. Angel Dust gets flirty with Husk again before Vaggie answers his prior question that they want the sinners to go and stay at this hotel of their own volition. I suppose that's a sufficient answer to a perpetually plot gaping hole that Angel Dust just mentioned, although if Alistair would have it his way, Hazbin Hotel would be more like Hazbin Asylum, and who would stop him exactly? Charlie calls Vaggie over to talk about the call she had with her dad, stating that the leader of the Exorcists wants to meet Charlie. For what reason and why so soon after the last purge is not mentioned in spite of Vaggie's questions, as Charlie starts to break into song. And with that comes the perfect opportunity for me to spill my guts about how much I don't like musicals in a lot of media, and especially of the ones presented in this show. To start, the problem that I have with musicals is that, in a way, they are a in-universe fourth wall break. Characters who have no disposition towards one another, have not been developed to have a talent for singing or choreography, all suddenly and spontaneously break out in song and know exactly what cues and movements to make. Before then, when I was young, a lot of musicals gave me second-hand embarrassment because of the feeling of being one of these actors who have to break their own character in order to facilitate this happening. But at that time, I didn't know that that was the reason for why musicals feel so out of place to begin with. And Hazbin Hotel has that problem in spades, with only 2 songs in its entire season runtime that even remotely justify themselves being musicals in the first place. It also doesn't help that for every episode, 2 musical numbers are obligatorily and arbitrarily slapped somewhere in the show, which will condition your audience to count the seconds of when the inevitable musical number rears its head. I can't believe that I'm saying this, but Hell of a Boss of all shows, in spite of its downwards trend in quality, had a better justification of its musical numbers and didn't feel the need to have at least 2 every episode. Oh Millie was a love ballad that Moxie made personally for his betrothed. You'll Be Okay is a lullaby Stolas sings to lull his daughter back to sleep. The Cherub song was set as an advertisement for the Cherubs. The song that Blitz and Moxie sing in Truth Seekers is in context of them having a bad trip, and Asmodeus' song is in the context of him performing in front of a live audience. There are ways to justify your musical numbers, and Hazbin Hotel hardly does. In fact, a lot of the musical numbers presented are done as a way to substitute actual dialogue we could have between our characters, especially prudent with the last musical in this season. So, what about Charlie's
Happy Day in Hell?
Does it justify itself with who is singing and what they're singing about? Now, while Charlie has been characterized even by the pilot's logic to have a upbeat, cheery, and break into song abruptly attitude, that doesn't justify why the other sinners seem to know when to throw their lines in cue and within meter of Charlie's verses, even if they do so quite briefly. As for what it is in the verses, I suppose I do wonder if it has crossed through Charlie's mind that some sinners can't simply be redeemed and are unwilling to change, or even the dilemma of having someone in heaven who was a victim of a sinner in hell sharing headspace with them in the same domain caused doubt in Charlie, but unfortunately for as much as Charlie has reminisced this dream of hers, she hasn't really looked past her navel about those factors, making Charlie as being hopelessly naive in her pursuit, like one would a child who thinks they'll grow up to be a dinosaur someday. Through all of the singing antics, Charlie has made it to the only heaven-made building residing in hell, which seems to function like some kind of receptionist hall that also has a countdown of the next purge on its building exterior. Frankly, I'm not sure what this is doing here and how it's able to keep itself free of any of the degradation outside of it, other than wacky angel magic, so we'll leave it at that. So in, Charlie greets herself to none other than Adam, the first man of Earth, and Lute, as her name is, as some exorcist compatriot of his, or even lover, maybe? And I'm going to get this out of the way. I cannot, in good conscience, take Adam seriously as a character. From nearly the first utterance of his words to his goofy, nonchalant approach to this meeting, he's obviously meant to be the central antagonist of this season, including Lute, but the show lampshades his being the bad guy in the most loopy, cartoonish way possible. It's like the show writers saw Jack Horner in The Last Wish and thought, oh, we could do that, but not funny, and we got Adam out the other end. And while I did preface this saying that I wouldn't use the adaptation argument when in relation to texts of the Bible, I think it would have been a lot more interesting to characterize Adam as being extremely prudish and complete business class if I'm to believe that he was the first mortal man who followed God's, or by this show, the angels' rules to the fucking letter, who may have a chip on his shoulder about losing 2 of his wives to the vices of sin. Now, granted, that might be why he's treating Charlie this way, as she is an extension of the 2 beings he loves the most, but he doesn't even seem to recognize Charlie that way, and that this is his entire attitude towards anybody and anything anyhow. The other perplexing thing about Adam is that, as a result of him being characterized this way, means either the rules of being in heaven are a lot more loose and implied in episode 4 of Helluva Boss. Keep in mind that Helluva Boss is still considered part of the same universe as Hazbin Hotel. Or they play favorites who would be the teacher's pet of teacher's pets, as Adam swears like a sailor because, cursing a lot is humor in this show, is lustful, jealous, and extremely prideful about his dick, and him being the original dick. Yeah, the first mortal man who ascended to angelhood exhibiting 3 of the 7 vices, and doing so blatantly? That's a first-class ticket to hell if I'm to believe even an act of manslaughter was enough for the cherubs to be denied access to heaven. And again, did the angels design him with these flaws in mind? Why would they design him with these flaws, knowing that goes against their entire precept about good and evil? And if Adam leaned in on these flaws on his own, then how did giving Eve the power of free will set in motion corruption to spread into Earth? A lot of questions I'm sure we could answer if Adam wasn't a fucking clown throughout this whole meeting, but he's chewing the scenery like the writers are chewing the script when they got nothing clever to write down to satiate my concerns. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Vaggie gathers the team together to pitch a commercial that more accurately displays the merits of their business than what Alistair's ad did, which goes about as well as you expect, with Husk literally reading off a teleprompter and Angel trying to get into Husk's pants every opportunity he can. Intermittently, we cut back to the meeting hall where Adam goes on some anecdote about the various vices he valiantly voices vociferously to Charlie, damn. I just wanted a clever alliteration to break this worthless dialogue we're having in the show. I will say it's a clever visual gag that Adam is eating spare ribs in front of Charlie that I didn't notice upon first viewing. That's about the most positive thing I can say about this dialogue. I guess through this, Charlie just realizes that she's speaking to Adam, and I suppose that's why her dad called to say she would go to the meeting so that he wouldn't have to deal with the dick master, as Adam puts it. That observation went past me on first viewing, but looking at it now, is that also to illustrate the daddy issues that Alistair so abruptly mentioned about Charlie? Because I find it rich how this show makes light of the concept of their central protagonist having daddy issues when almost every single main character in Helluva Boss has daddy issues. Really says something about the main creator behind these shows that that's all they can write. Makes you wonder. Back at the home motel, we get the first joke that is actually quite funny, in which Vaggie needs Nifty to help with the commercial she's making, but every time she puts the camera on Nifty, she goes completely blank-faced in response, having no recollection of her just doing that. This, of course, also accentuates the frustrations Vaggie has with getting any decent material to make their commercial, chiming in Alistair, who plays coy with her failings to get her commercial off the ground before trying to strike a deal, something Vaggie established in the pilot to be a very bad thing to do with the likes of Alistair. As for what the deal entails, Alistair states that he'll help make a proper commercial with Vaggie if she does away with any technology regarding television, to which she reluctantly obliges. Now, establishing that Alistair could have made a commercial at any point and only choosing to do so when he has someone under his clutches, even if minute, leads me to believe that he was trying in some way to orchestrate some deal between the staff at Hazbin Hotel. Although I say this thinking there is some dubious intent behind him making this deal with Vaggie, when inevitably it's just him having beef with another overlord, as he doesn't attempt making a deal with Angel Dust or even Sir Pentious once he enters the picture in episode 2. I also don't understand why Alistair couldn't have attempted making this deal with Vaggie the moment he displayed his disgust about TV sooner, unless he needed Vaggie in a desperate predicament while playing into her feelings for Charlie. It just feels dragged out. Back to the other dragged out scene, Charlie expresses concern with Adam about the overpopulation in hell, a concern she expressed in the pilot. Now, this was a criticism with the pilot that is now compounded with the criticism of this show, but how does hell become overpopulated in a realm like it? It's not like Earth where there is limited space, limited resources, and the like. Hell can be shrunken and expanded in whatever leisure Lucifer or Lilith see fit, can it not? Not to mention, this concern about overpopulation will come at a cross with what a certain other character in episode 3 will state, as well as Charlie's main concern of wanting a chance of redemption, and not so much about how many Hellborn inhabit it. But we'll burn that bridge when we cross it. Of course, Adam doesn't give a shit about the overpopulation and sees what he's doing as the solution to that, and whatever chance we could have for him to justify his behavior, he just plays it off like a clown. And I'm not shitting you. The dialogue that Lute and Charlie have between each other, despite literally being a few lines, is more meaningful of an examination of how the angels see the sinners as, and how they justify purging them for good. What's more, is that Lute gives this line to Charlie about her status in hell.
The reason you're still here is because Daddy gave you and your Hellborn kind a pardon from an exorcist blade. How does that feel?
So, now I have more questions. What do the Hellborn do exactly in hell if they are spared the threat of extermination? They certainly aren't punishing the sinners as they are typically depicted to do, and if anything, they're the ones who are enabling the behavior of sinners to act the way that they do. And furthermore, am I to believe that when the yearning for a purging happens, that the exorcists know and can differentiate between who's sinner and Hellborn? I mean, not like the fucking show could differentiate it for us, as during the development of episodes for Hell of a Boss Season 1, it was retconned that all sinners are sent to the Pride Ring, where the majority of Hazbin Hotel's setting takes place, and cannot travel to any of the other rings of hell. I can only assume this was done to make it easier for the writers for the exorcists to kill seemingly indiscriminately during the purging hour. But at the same time, that means that there will still be Hellborn amongst the myths that exorcists either care or don't know are killing. Secondly, while it may make sense for the angels to give a pardon to Lucifer as they want to keep his hopes down, why would they ever agree to make a pardon on purging the likes of Charlie or Lilith? And if I'm to believe that Lilith would be considered Hellborn by the angels' logic, and she already having been described as enriching hell's domain further, this comes as a completely illogical choice for heaven to make. Now, is this a logical choice deliberate, an example of poor writing and world building, or a unwillingness to characterize heaven in any other way but Reddit atheist bad? I'm going to say this a lot for some of the writing choices in this show, and any of these options are equally retarded. Well, as I alluded to earlier, this show needs its second musical on cue, which of course breaks the immersion that I already stated, as it starts with Charlie again breaking into song before Lute and Adam butt in with Hell is Forever. So, did Adam and Lute expect to break into song whether or not Charlie would at the end of their meeting? And how does Lute know the lines or the cues to break into song along with Adam, since he's the one who opened with it? As for the musical being a substitute for dialogue, the only ones of note is this one that Adam says, as well as his stating that he and the exorcists, are expediting the purges to every 6 months, simply because they're getting bored waiting. Yeah, really fleshed out character there, writers. Might as well carve evil on his forehead for all the subtlety of this writing. But, emphasizing on what he said about expediting the purges, if it's such a necessity for heaven to do this, and increase the regularity of them, why not cut the middleman and exterminate them all right now? What exactly is stopping them doing it, unless I'm supposed to believe that heaven is just so evil that they want to stagger out the suffering? But, alas, we don't know yet at this point of the story, and the arbitrary length is just a means to put some amount of stakes in the story, as though there wasn't already. Charlie returns to the hotel rejected, with Vaggie embracing her, the former dodging the question about her meeting with the angels, while the latter is excited about showing her the fruits of the staff's labor. I will say it is an interesting juxtaposition of these two characters' moods when Charlie initially left, but as I said, it's merely interesting. Anyhow, Charlie is grateful that they made a new commercial for the hotel and is sat around waiting to hear it, at least until their ad gets cut off by a sudden news announcement detailing the very thing that was told to Charlie by Adam a few minutes ago. I suppose as a way to make things awkward with Charlie as to why she didn't tell them sooner, like literally seconds sooner, and for one of the most whiplashiest pacing cuts that I've seen in a long while. So, get this. Right after that news announcement plays, we get a hard cut of some angelic ship scanning a dead exorcist, raising the concerns of Lute as this is the first time that Hell has managed to kill one of their own, with Adam reassuring her that their next purge will make it so that this won't happen again. I was so confused by what was happening with how quickly these two scenes jammed between one another that it was hard for me to process what was happening. And keep in mind, the pilot for Hazbin Hotel was 45 minutes long, and that had some pacing issues too, but nowhere near on the scale of this barely 22-minute affair of an 8-episode season. Maybe I'd be more fine with these shorter episodes if we didn't spend them having a whimsical musical number that does nothing to advance the plot, and a season that was more than the sum of its parts. But it will become extremely evident how scrapped for time a lot of the characters are in the establishing themselves part, which is funny. The Wednesday Netflix show felt too long doing nothing at all with the time it has with its characters, yet this show has the opposite problem of not having enough time to do nothing at all with its characters. Anyhow, Lute expresses the very thing I wonder about regarding the purges, yet the only thing Adam says to counter that is, we don't want them catching on, which, fair, maybe the expediting of these purges would have one to believe that Heaven is on the back foot and losing their power struggle against Hell, but that would be all the more reason to at least entertain the idea of redeeming the sinners, as doing so would inevitably shift the scales of powers in Heaven's favor. But here I am, thinking Adam isn't a fucking clown person and actually has some pragmatic reason to keep the powers that be being the powers that they are, but wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which one fills up faster. And that was episode 1 of Hazbin Hotel, and like with Wednesday, we are not starting with our best foot forward. The world building is quite borked, the motivations of our antagonists is cartoonishly villainous, while the motivations of our protagonists are poorly thought out, and the speediness of getting these characters fast-tracked into the story isn't done without consequence. Let's see what episode 2 holds. So, we start episode 2 already establishing what was revealed in episode 1, mainly as a way to show Charlie's anxiety about having even less time than expected to make her social experiment work. While Vaggie tries to reassure her, Angel Dust isn't exactly optimistic with how the rest of Hell has reacted to this revelation, all the while getting blown up in text from Valentino, who we'll get to know a lot more of in episode 4. Because of this desperation, Vaggie surmises that this is the perfect opportunity to recruit sinners using the hotel as a sort of safe haven. But before that plan can go in motion, Sir Pentious introduces himself in a similar veneer towards the end of the pilot. In fact, it's such a similar circumstance, what with him blowing up a wall, which humorously does become a running gag in this show, and being subsequently defeated handedly by Alistair, that it makes me wonder why the show even bothered to make the pilot canon, especially when they've recasted the voices for the characters while giving them a slight overhaul in their costumes. As for Pentious himself, while he is on here on behalf of Vengeance Against Alistair, he's also here on behalf of the V's, which summarily is the trio comprised of Vox, Velvet, and Valentino. All three of which will have an episode partially dedicated to them, with Vox being first to bat in episode 2. Keep what Pentious says about them in notes, as it will be ignored up until it's made relevant again. Awkwardly, before we can get a conclusion to the fight between Sir Pentious and the hotel, we have to understand the dynamic that the V's share with one another, as it's implied, not exactly well either, that the V's lean on one another to keep themselves relevant. Vox's way of earning his keep with the V's is that he's the main proprietor of all things technology-wise, whether that be cameras, television, or wiring in general. Initially, Vox seems to be the most level-headed of the group as he has to calm down a situation Valentino is having in Velvet's department, likely to do with the late absence of Angel Dust in his stead. This is also vindicated when he gives a glad-handed response to how he plans on dealing with the moving up of the exterminations. Now, while I did say that this episode was more dedicated to Vox regarding the V's, we do still see briefly how the other V's bounce off one another, with Velvet being the one who manages the presentation of the other two either on social media or just in general attire. Of course, this will get further lampshaded with the musical involving episode 3, but alas, because this is an 8-episode season with a runtime as short as most Nickelodeon cartoons, we have to really fast-track these characters in. And I might as well pull the wool under your eyes about them, as past episode 4, these characters will not be a fundamental heel to Hazbin Hotel or even the residents in Hazbin Hotel, as they likely will be saved as main antagonists for whatever season 2 comes around. How so? Well, I don't want to pull every fiber of wool out of your eyes just yet. Vox confronts Valentino on what's got him so pissy, and predictably enough, it's about Angel Dust and having walked out on him, in spite of what arrangement they made between one another. As for what Valentino serves the efforts of the V's, it seems he either services the pornographic side of the industry, or more likely provides the labor needed for Vox and Velvet's interests in how top-heavy they would be without it. Through Val's rantings, he informs Vox that Angel is staying with Lucifer's daughter, and plans on getting Angel back by his own means, something Vox disapproves of greatly, stating that optically it would look bad for Val to go after a two-dime whore, as Vox puts it. After calming Valentino's mood, the dynamic changes as Val also lets Vox know that Alistair has returned and presumably has made a deal with Lucifer's daughter, shifting the anger and lack of resolve towards Vox instead. And then, and only then, do we awkwardly cut back to Alistair playing with his food with Sir Pentious by way of Valentino playing one of Vox's surveyor drones, catching witness to this one-sided conflict. Now, several problems with what has been established between Vox and Valentino leading up to this. First off, if Sir Pentious went to the hotel on behalf of the V's, then why was Valentino planning on going there as well? And did Vox nor Velvet knew that Sir Pentious was doing this on their behalf? I mean, chances are Sir Pentious did this of his own volition, yet also makes it a point to state that he wants to prove himself to the V's. Secondly, if Vox's entire gimmick is that he's got a watchful eye on everything going on in hell, then how did Valentino know that Alistair was at the hotel before him? Especially when there was a drone of his spying on the hotel from a bird's eye view? I'm going to assume with him being a TV for a head, that he would also have the same available information that all of his other drones can give to him, as he has also made it a point prior that he can hypnotize his customers with said drones through the brow of his eye, so this being a surprise to Vox is befuddling. Sir Pentious is defeated, but not before he can pull a quick one on Alistair by ripping a piece of his clothing, which segues to Alistair leaving the hotel to get his suit tailored. Of course, that was a extremely contrived way for him to inevitably have his musical duet with Vox, as is customary for the show to have at least 2 sprinkled in, so in chimes, "Stayed gone," which, like with the songs thus far, is jammed quite awkwardly. This is vindicated that in spite of the rivalry that Vox and Alistair share, they also seem to rhyme along with each other and sing in meter too. As for said rivalry, episode 2 is literally the only episode where it gets lampshaded this hard, unless you consider a truncated version of it in episode 8 as the exception. So, having wasted this much time for a musical number for something that will not get redressed again is a curious decision to me. As for what the dialogue disguised as lyrics propose, Vox mentions that Alistair has also been absent for 7 years, planting the seed of duplicity that Alistair might share with Lilith. But if planting seeds in Chaz/Chop has taught me that you can't simply expect that seed to bear fruit without knowing how to grow it, and this show believes that you can with that alone, likely saving it for a season 2 reveal. A bit ironic, considering that with the pacing of the show, it feels like 3 seasons worth of reveals will be laid in plane, and yet somehow the writers still can afford to not blow their entire load in this season alone. This was a similar problem regarding the Wednesday show, where a character had plans to involve themselves in something under fear of their dirty secrets being revealed. A plot point that did not get carried into season 1, expecting the audience to care or know about the ramifications of such deal once season 2 rolls around, if season 2 ever sees the light of day. Anyhow, Alistair chimes in on his radio because of Vox's dare and implies what I already mentioned, that without Velvet or Valentino, Vox would be helpless, and likely Velvet and Valentino as well for the other two. Also of note visually is that Alistair gets Vox so worked up that he blue screens and causes an entire EMP malfunction in the Ring of Pride, getting me really curious just how much power Vox has over the city, yet somehow has evaded extermination for as long as he has. In fact, a lot of the bigger players in Hell seem to just casually avoid these purges and almost treat them as a formality at this venture, which again comes as a cross against the insistence that Heaven uses these purges to corral Hell's power. It'd be like if pest control advertised itself on dealing with major bug infestations in houses, but only comes in to kill random lowly bugs that they are within earshot of. It feels incredibly inefficient of the Angels to bother, yet we're also supposed to believe that this expediting will change anything and be a major threat for Hell's denizens. Anyhow, after that duet, Vox has a meeting with the V's to discuss the matter of Alistair, as he fears that Alistair may wind up striking a deal between him and Charlie, although this concern has less to do with what Alistair's real motives are, and more to do with threatening the V's power struggle over the Pride Ring. You know, thinking about it, I don't see why the V's couldn't handle this matter diplomatically, as I'm sure Charlie is also not keen on striking any deals with Alistair, but maybe it's because Angel Dust is there and any association with Valentino is bad news for the hotel. The plan that the V's strike is to get someone on the inside who can plant some spy equipment to keep tabs on the hotel from the inside. Someone who has no ties to us. Now, first off, how has Vox not already got spy equipment inside of the hotel if I'm to believe that Alistair has been gone for the last 7 years and that said equipment is so good that he can have it near the hotel without Alistair noticing? Unless when Alistair made that deal with Vaggie that he fished for any technology inside of it like a bloodhound prior to this plan in motion? Because that doesn't square away Vox not knowing Alistair had returned and made some arrangement with Charlie prior to him making the hotel his own. Secondly, the candidate for this chicanery is Sir Pentious, if it wasn't already obvious. In fact, it's a bit too obvious of a choice considering Pentious just outright stated that he was attacking the hotel on behalf of them. So, inexorably, he does have ties with the V's by what Charlie, Vaggie, and Angel Dust witness, so chances are they'll know he's up to no good. Back at Hotel Hell on a budget, the plan that Vaggie and Charlie got up to before that exposition Sunday got slapped on our laps goes nowhere. Why exactly? Sin and spin for all this show answers. Anyhow, Sir Pentious comes knocking with interest to redeem himself, while Charlie takes this invitation gladly, because like I said, child. Angel and Vaggie are quite reticent to inviting him in. Not because of his reasons for attacking the hotel, but simply that he attacked the hotel, because I guess we got caught up in how pathetic Sir Pentious has been characterized as, that something like that goes amiss. I should also mention that I also can't take Sir Pentious seriously as a character, as he's made the proverbial butt of everyone else's jokes, especially to the detriment of what this show finds appalling. He hardly ever gets a chance to be remotely competent, endearing, complex, or likewise, feeling like a 7th wheel in this 6-wheel abomination of a cast. The only thing of substance is that while Charlie got excited to show Pentious all around, she undercut Angel's importance of being the first guest at their hotel, as Charlie feels Pentious is more sincere than he. Meanwhile, Charlie reintroduces Pentious to Alistair yet again, which ensues Charlie to do some learning exercises, starting with the need to apologize. This is foreshadowing for what will become the obligatory second musical number in this show, but let's hold that until it happens. On top of that exercise is show and tell with the staff about themselves. Angel Dust not playing along, whereas Sir Pentious does as best as he can to participate. Compounding this is a skit where Angel pretends to be a drug dealer selling drugs to Serpentius, who's playing as a little kid. There's a line that Angel says I'm going to use whenever the plot of this show literally nosedives, a bit ironic since he's saying this in regards to deliberately bad writing the writers wrote in universe of Charlie having wrote them.
Who wrote this?
While this whole sequence does drag on, I think this is meant to exacerbate how Angel Dust is getting short bust in favor of Serpentius, and how Serpentius is giving his all into the role to ferment trust in Charlie and Vaggie. It is also interesting how, in contrast to when Husk was reading his lines right from the script, that Angel is now doing the very same, when before he memorized his lines even if he did so in a slutty manner. Frustrated, Angel storms up into his room while reading through Valentino's frankly bipolar messages towards him. It seems Angel is having second thoughts about staying at the hotel because he's reading these messages until what seems like a visage of Valentino chimes in. Or perhaps Angel Dust's own conscience telling him he can't change. I've ragged on this show for the better part of 40 minutes, but little character moments like these, for as few and far between as they are quite great examinations that I can't help but give praise to, even if knowing how they'll be utilized later. Angel drowns his sorrows some more before some shuffling down the hall catches his curiosity. He peeks through a door ajar and notices Serpentius put up one of the spy cameras up along a shelf. Angel confronts him on the matter, stating that,
You working for the V's? I fucking knew there was something shitty about you.
before the two tussle a bit. Yeah, Angel, did you forget when he said he was attacking the hotel on behalf of them earlier, and you didn't feel the need to mention that to Charlie or Vaggie? But I guess they were also too stupid to remember that detail as well, so all's fair and dumb and poor. Charlie and Vaggie wake up to the commotion, wondering what the fuss is all about. Angel Dust undresses Serpentius as a traitor, pointing to the camera he planted, and Pentius attempts making a run for it with the wristwatch he had as a contingency. Unfortunately, Vox isn't interested in bailing him out, quite upset with his failure to keep his shit clean for even a day. So, I guess Vox doesn't care about what Alistair has up in store for Charlie up to this point, because after this, he never makes another attempt to spy on them outside the hotel, making me wonder what the point of all of this was other than to slot Serpentius amongst the main cast. Despondent, Serpentius curls up, awaiting his inevitable fate by their hands. While Vaggie is eager to do him in, Charlie, for no discernible reason, breaks in song with
It starts with sorry.
despite knowing Pentius has attacked their hotel and lied to them before. I'm sorry, but this is getting to Steven Universe levels of ridiculous, where if some genocidal maniac just feels bad about it enough, that somehow forgives all the wrongdoing they did before. No, I'm not suggesting that they should just kill Serpentius on the spot, but the fact that this musical plays like a fucking PBS Kids special, and that Charlie, nor any of the hotel staff, will keep their eyes on Serpentius if he fucks up again after this, goes to show the extremely immature nature of Charlie that is not in the least way endearing, as well as the immature nature of this show believing that this is the correct way to tackle this, when if anything, Serpentius will come away thinking all he has to do is say sorry and that rectifies anything. And to top it all the fuck off, in spite of Charlie, of all people, opening with this song, she will not learn anything from it for a character she should absolutely give much more patience to than she does for Serpentius deceiving her. Yeah, have to agree with Nifty on this one, even if meta-contextual, I hate this fucking song. And that was episode 2. It's not nearly as bad as episode 1, simply that the world building implications are currently in the rearview mirror, but the pacing of these new characters is still breakneck, the introduction of Serpentius as a permanent staple of the hotel is contrived, and the Flanderization of Charlie, as well as many of these characters, is bordering on insufferable. Will episode 3 and 4 continue this trend or revert it? Before we start episode 3, I figured that I'd add a bit of an addendum to episode 2 that I feel will be pertinent to the series going forward, as in spite of my issues with it, is the only episode that even remotely tackles the central premise of Hazbin Hotel, that being trying to redeem sinners. Similarly to Hell of a Boss, Hazbin Hotel has a identity crisis towards what it's trying to tell its audience or convey, as it betrays the initial premise from the more cliche and overdone one. Even if Sir Pentious' intentions to be redeemed in episode 2 were initially more ulterior, having a mere diaspora into how the hotel attempts its act of redemption is more fundamental than whatever tall tales Charlie can spin about it. Anyhow, we start off episode 3 leading somewhat off from the apex of episode 2 as Sir Pentious ingratiates himself as part of the hotel. Of course, not without some bumps in the way, as his penchant for violence and weapons dealing are still fresh on his mind. This is also a way to foreshadow Camilla Carmine's introduction into the story, a character that I once thought was a complete invention of this show, for getting her literal JPEG image cameo in the pilot, as she is the main weapons dealer of Hell that Pentious buys from. Being the sword of this hotel, Vaggie stamps down Pentious' prudence for purchasing products of penetrative power as Pentious pleads that people are plotting to put him in the dirt. Mainly, those people would be the other residents of the hotel, which obviously would make sense he would be on his guard given Vaggie and Angel were fine to rid of him when permanent. Charlie figures that this could be an opportunity for some trust exercises before Vaggie puts some ground rules on Sir Pentious, most notably that his little egg minions have to skip town. Now, given that the main issue with the hotel as of yet is even getting people to arrive at the hotel, much less stick around, why would Vaggie want to kick out the only other residents that came at Sir Pentious' request? Am I to believe these egg boys are not sinners but creations of Sir Pentious? Because we never really get an answer as to the physiology of them. They basically function like Hazbin Hotel's version of the minions from Despicable Me, especially in the manner they swear allegiance to anyone with careless disregard for their own safety. And, because they function that way, wouldn't it be more conducive to the hotel to have Pentious command them in a way that was more beneficial to the hotel? I don't even see why they couldn't have been made into hotel staff themselves, if I am to believe that they're merely homunculi of Sir Pentious' own creation. But the real reasons why Vaggie want these egg boys gone is a conceit of the writers and nothing to do with Vaggie's own internal logic, as we will soon find out later in this episode. Sir Pentious solemnly waves off his loyal minions before we cut to Alistair eating some roadkill in some pocket dimension of his. At least that's what I think it is, before Vaggie storms in to tell Alistair to take care of the egg minions himself. Why exactly Vaggie couldn't herself is, again, a reason the writers will square that circle into at the cost of logical consistency, so now it's Alistair's time to babysit the minions. Meanwhile, Charlie gets started on those trust exercises she mentioned before, as she feels none of the residents henceforth have confided in one another. Now, another narrative footnote they want to supplant in this episode as well as is that Charlie wants Vaggie to take the lead on this exercise, which is meant to be a flaw of her character that she is either unable or unwilling to make this a cooperative process. Now, remind me again what the fuck were those two doing in episode 1? Oh, that's right, Charlie went alone to the meeting of the angels, and Vaggie had to scrounge up an advertisement for the hotel by herself. And apparently that wasn't a problem of either to split up and do their own thing, and furthermore, they will do the splitting up again in episode 7, so it beggars belief why this is suddenly a conflict between the two now? So Vaggie takes the lead, starting with the typical trust fall exercise where she outlines the rules if you're not familiar. The segment goes nowhere and is meant to be more humorous and substantial, although admittedly, Nifty once again sparks some guffaw in me with the way she just falls from the podium only to take joy in the pain and do it in perpetuity. Because this gets nowhere, and because Charlie planted the seed for Vaggie to take the lead, Vaggie insists she'll find a way to build trust in the group without Charlie's help, something Angel suggests an idea for just the job. Before we can figure out what that idea is, we cut back to Alistair and his new entourage of egg minions, who seem to be annoying him to no end until he gets suddenly greeted by Zestial, the oldest living overlord currently residing Hell. Like with Carmine, Zestial was another JPEG image level cameo of the pilot, who gets an upgrade to 2 to 3 minute level cameo in this episode, as he's largely irrelevant throughout the rest of the show. The importance of Zestial to appear before Alistair is that he further leans in on the possibility that Alistair's absence was as a result of an affair he made with a holy being, as well as their mutual arrangement of going to some kind of gathering of other noteworthy overlords to discuss the matter of the expediting of the purges. They go into some elevator or bank vault tube or something before Alistair shoos the egg minions to stay put at the base of this contraption. But, unbeknownst to him, one of them accidentally stumble and follow Alistair to the cluelessness of everyone else arriving. Well, I say that, but one does notice him, and her name is Rosie, but we won't know that until later, and doesn't seem to mind his presence here at all in spite of clearly not being an overlord and of the possibility of him being a spy for other means. But, as I said earlier, the reason for Vaggie to push out the Egg Boys was for this very circumstance to happen, in which one of them would eavesdrop on the conversation that the respective overlords have on the matter, in a way, being the ears for the audience watching the show. Why this needed to be the case instead of just having it in the POV of Alistair is baffling to me, but again, there will be a pin on a particular detail that a certain V of the V's will impart to the rest of the overlords soon. Anyhow, Carmine gets the meeting started, surprised to see Alistair of all here given his long absence, discussing the means of which to minimize the losses from the purges in lieu of this increased posterity of them. She mentions explicitly that
this year's extermination was brutal, far more even than years past. We have assessed that about 16% of the population was lost.
Before getting interrupted by Velvet, the second of the V's that gets some highlight here. Now, given that Charlie's main concern about the need for redemption had to do with overpopulation of hell, would put what Carmine said at a cross as 16% is in no way a small number, especially if we go by yearly rates. So either Carmine is exaggerating the losses or that Charlie is exaggerating the extent of overpopulation. While I was looking up details about said population, a random wiki blurb about the Pride Ring mentions a cut character by the name of Corey, stating that the current population in said Ring of Pride was around 50 billion. Whether that 50 billion was the population after the 16% cut, making the original to be around 60 billion, or that 50 billion was the amount before the extermination prior to the show's start, the math in this show does not add up. First, in recognizing that in all of human history, around 117 billion people have ever existed at any one time, and given law of averages for evil and good, must mean that somehow 58 or so billion sinners were able to live purge-free up until this recent purge. Or the more absurd idea that the amount of sinners that existed in hell was somewhere in the range of a Googleplex if 16% of them were getting shorned out every year. Conversely, by this 16% cut of sinners, if we take the flat 50 billion at the start of the Abrahamic era, 6,000 years, would mean that by the time Hazbin Hotel would take place, that not one sinner would even exist by this point. Now, granted, Carmine does specify that this extermination was brutale, so being generous, maybe the exorcists only kill roughly 8% of the sinners residing in the Ring of Pride per year on average. That amount is still problematic to the notion that we're to believe overpopulation would still be a problem, and or that there would even be a population of hell big enough to concern Adam into expediting them further. Also, the logistics of even killing as many as they do are absurd. In episode 1, Luke confirms to Adam that she killed about 275 sinners on Purge Day, which is apparently quite impressive for an exorcist like her. So, give or take, the likely average that an exorcist can kill per year is around 200, meaning that if the exorcist killed anywhere from 8.2 to 10 billion sinners that year, would require them to have at least 41 to 50 million exorcists on board to do so. This may not be important, but when we do see the extent of Adam's exorcist horde, as well as the nature of this purge being done in secret, means that not once did the writers account for the sheer manpower to pull off such a thing without getting public notice, nor how such an effort would make expediting this purge pointless by the result of their genocides. Man, isn't math fun? Although, unfortunately, even the math I've outlined doesn't account for a number of other factors, like whether sinners can reproduce in hell, which is a whole nother can of worms for what heaven is doing, whether sinners can kill one another permanently in hell, or even die permanently of other means like starvation, disease, or natural aging. So, for all I know, the circumstance of these purges are even more poorly thought out than the writers intended. After going through that autistic detail, Velvet storms in to inform the rest of the overlords of the knowledge of a dead exorcist by way of throwing the decapitated head of one, presumably missing from the body that Lute and Adam discovered in episode 1. Velvet also displays some apathy about this whole meeting, at least in regards to how Carmine is handling it, suggesting that as a result of this revelation would mean that the overlords have a chance to take the fight to them. Of course, Zestial isn't buying this on account of there being no concrete proof of how this angel even died to begin with, going so far as concerning the matter that if the overlords were to try to overthrow this purge, that heaven would be left up with no choice but to exterminate them all. Yeah, and I wonder why they haven't done so now or at any other point if this is such a persistent problem for them. Or better yet, cut it at the source with Lilith too? But, indeed, like with the pest control analogy I made in part 1, if the people I'd hired somehow got killed by the insects in said house, either the house would get condemned or fucking burned to the ground at that stage, a concern of which certain characters of note will not give a shit about later on. And boy, won't that dissolve whatever tissue paper foundation of a plot this show belies upon. Anyhow, the discussion gets curious amongst the crowd while Velvet jumps down Zestial's throat before Carmine butts in to defend his honor, and... what's that? Oh, that's the sound of another fucking musical number! In chimes, Respectless, which is this weird crossover of opera and rap notes, at least respectively when Carmine or Velvet sing their parts in tandem. Shit, even Zestial gets a line in. Surprised he managed to stay on rhyme and meter for Velvet's sake when neither seem to respect each other. A bit ironic given the fucking name of the song, but you already know my feelings about musicals like this, especially ones that butt in like a splinter in my fingernail. Anyhow, as for what the lyrics detail, Velvet suspects that Carmine is hiding something behind her attitude regarding her bringing up the dead exorcist, as though Carmine knows the extent of how said exorcist died and doesn't want to impart further. As for a choreography fuck-up, despite the fact that Velvet had already thrown the head clear across the meeting table, she somehow does it again in the singing bit, as though the head somehow transported itself back on Velvet's side of the table. Because Velvet is getting too prying on Carmine's affair, she ends the meeting abruptly with all the overlords leaving, apparently not at odds with the matter regarding the purge, in spite of Velvet just having given them a golden opportunity to strike back at the angels, whether or not they would retaliate. But alas, the reason for this meeting to end is that Alistair only just discovers the aloof egg minion and tasks him with further spying on Carmine and Zestial to find out more about the nature behind this dead exorcist. And as I said, we will discover just how dire this contrivance of Vaggie kicking out the egg minions will be for the plot later on, similarly to a circumstance regarding the end of episode 3 of Wednesday, funnily enough. Going back to the other B plot of this show, Vaggie is appalled to find what Angel considers building trust via BDSM. Of course, this idea of his goes nowhere because humor is more pragmatic of a concern to Angel rather than being productive, which once again has Charlie insist she'll help, but alas, Vaggie is still determined to wing this on her own. And Vaggie's own way of building trust is yet again stupidly comedic, as she basically puts the staff at the front lines of other demons indiscriminately killing one another. Although, with the matter that Vaggie does try to build trust through violence, does spark a small hint about her as a character we'll get to examine later. Anyhow, Charlie finally puts her foot down and suggests that this isn't the way, to which Vaggie pleads to Charlie of her own concern regarding how little of a timetable they have to make this hotel work, which ensues Vaggie to have vulnerabilities about her inability to take control in said dire matter. This is meant to put some distance between Charlie and Vaggie as partners, as the latter wants to have a moment to herself while the former hugs herself in contempt, which I will say is done quite well, even if this is the most meaningful dynamic that we've had between these two in the span of 3 episodes. Back at Carmilla's HQ, she sulks in her spirits while Zestial tries to comfort her distress at the embarrassment Velvet made of them. Carmine isn't willing to impart, which gets Zestial to assume that it was her who killed that angel, meaning Carmine knows the extent of how to kill them and is being tight-lipped about it. Jeez, I hope this extremely revealing detail isn't being overheard by what's essentially a fucking side gag of all things, and that said overhearing will not get addressed again until near the conclusion of this story, by God. Of course, as God ordained it, the second musical number cues, which involves a extremely confused duet of Carmine and Vaggie of all people, two characters who have yet to have any interaction between the other, and whose delivery of their lines is on two polar extremes. Vaggie being unusually high-pitched for who's voicing her, and Carmine's being low-pitched for how she normally talks, singing alongside one another. Yet, in spite of that, there is something about this song that sort of works for me. Maybe that because these two people are singing in ignorance of one another, that would clear up any issues I normally have with musicals being a fourth wall break, and that the musical itself is kind of like this progressive rock ballad with how it builds and cascades its piano and guitar motifs between Vaggie and Carmine. So yeah. Not to be confused with a Imagine Dragons song, is the most polarizing of songs for how I feel about it. As for what the lyrics entail, initially when I watched this, I was confused as to what Carmine's conceit was about her actions, but paying attention to the lyrics, as well as what Zestial brought up to Velvet earlier, it would make sense that Carmine wouldn't want people to be made aware of the possibility of Angelkind being felled at the risk of a biblical war between the two, and what she will likely lose out the other side. This is all well and good, except for the fact that Carmine has already been established to be a weapons dealer, and of a extra bit of lore that Helluva Boss makes mention of that Hazbin Hotel desperately wants you to forget for the sake of this to be an issue for her. I can't tell you what that particular detail is, because if I do, you'll likely figure out exactly how an angel can be killed, and we'll have to save that for episode 7 going in. Also, remember what I said earlier about how we can't determine whether these purges account for offspring of sinners? Well, Carmine killed this exorcist to protect her daughters, and if I'm to believe that overlords are just an advanced version of sinners, means sinners can reproduce. So now the acts of heaven are even more heinous than I think even the writers realize, since in spite of these entities being described as sinners, might as well be human equivalents when the show wants them to be. As for Vaggie's conceits, there is yet another peculiar line she says in the perspective of meeting Charlie, as though Vaggie herself wasn't born or hadn't arrived in hell initially, and there will be more crumbs I'm feeding into your minds as to Vaggie's true countenance when that reveal comes crashing in episode 6, but nevertheless, Vaggie wants to be Charlie's armor, and be the one who understands her plight and build upon it, or as I surmise, the sword to Charlie's more defensive demeanor. All well and good intentions of Vaggie, but I don't think what has happened in episode 3 is indicative of Vaggie's faults more so than Charlie's, but I don't think neither of them would have been on board doing projects by themselves unless provoked to. Alistair intercepts Frank, that's the only named egg minion, as to what he overheard, and he basically lays it out that Carmine killed the angel. Whether Alistair will do anything with this information is yet to be seen, and given what I know full well he won't do a goddamn about it. As for that conceit I mentioned about Charlie and Vaggie, they patch up their differences as Charlie apologizes to Vaggie for putting so much pressure on her, while acknowledging that in spite of Vaggie's unorthodox ways, her exercise did build some rapport between the other residents of the hotel. In turn, Alistair returns with the egg minions, prompting Vaggie to return them back to Serpentius, making me yet again wonder why it was such a problem for them to be in the hotel to begin with, but maybe that also was a learning exercise of Vaggie? The last scene in this show is meant to be a joke, but with how Serpentius takes it makes the show stupid out the other end, as the named egg minion lets slip Pentius about how angels can be killed instead of already being told by Alistair to keep that on the down low. And of course, Pentius just assumes that they're just talking nonsense and goes fast asleep. Oh geez, I wonder if by chance any of the other residents heard any of that? That would be quite the powder keg if and when this social experiment fails. Or, better yet, maybe there already is a character in the hotel right now who should know angels can't be killed because... Oops, almost spoiled something again. But yeah, that was episode 3. Not much to grind my teeth on, and in an interesting parallel to the Wednesday show, this show also has quite a lot of filler with its 2 B-plots stretched to their limits on an episode that is already on borrowed time, like with Wednesday's episode 3. Will episode 4 continue this pattern and thus dissolve any patience I have with this show? We shall see. Now, before I get started on episode 4, I should address the elephant in the room regarding the discussion had about this particular episode. This one has been quite divisive amongst the critics, the haters, the fans, and the casual observers with how this show tackles a touchy subject about sexual assault. This is not me trying to give you a trigger warning about the subject or placate my opinions about this show for the sanctity of those who insist it's either the worst or best episode in the entire season. This is me letting you know ahead of time that you will not be satisfied with my opinions and criticisms of this episode as a result of your own preconceived notions about it. So with that, let us start episode 4 as it begins with Angel Dust in a precarious situation, bound and at the mercy of someone interrogating him about some vault his boss has stashed. Although, as it turns out, this is nothing more than a porn skit that Angel is showing the rest of the crew as per the show and tell exercise Charlie emphasized back in episode 3. While the rest of the staff are quite disturbed by what they're seeing, Husk isn't remotely impressed, calling Angel on his bluff about the poor quality of these films he's showing. As being the bartender, he has to deal with the open insecurities of each of the main cast as he proceeds to chew out the entire staff as well as Angel about the fake veneer he puts across. I get that Husk is characterized for this show to be unwilling to deal with anyone else's bullshit, but I also get the feeling that Husk did this for the audience's sake to understand the major conceits of our staff as we are nearly halfway through this show already with barely anything to gravitate to our main cast. Angel retorts by saying that's what you get when you're an actor before getting a surprise call by Valentino about wanting him to return to work, chastising Husk for whatever opinions he has of him. Charlie interrupts by saying they need to continue with these exercises to prove the viability of redemption, but alas, Angel has to prioritize his contract over her needs and leaves much to her chagrin. Faggy suggests, in Charlie's frustration, that with her being the princess of hell, that she could use that position to assert her will upon the rest of the denizens, which will foreshadow a big tangent I want to go over about the utter flanderization of Charlie as a character from her depiction in the pilot compared to here, but we'll save that for later. What I will say is that while what Vaggie is saying is in line with her telling Angel that they want sinners to willingly go to the hotel of their own vocation, it doesn't tidy up why none of the other overlords have ever once taken Charlie's position in hell into account. Unless I'm made to believe that Charlie has defamed her position in such a way that not even the lowliest denizens find her intimidating, it means in a ironic twist of fate, Charlie could have had more sinners gone to the hotel, even under the vaguest threat of reprisal, had she not tried to sell herself as this ooh precious cinnamon roll that she does. Anyhow, this suggestion of Vaggie to Charlie is all in the spirit of trying to convince Valentino to put his needing of Angel aside in favor of her wants. Something that I'm sure should be easy by not only the veiled attempts by Vox to spy on them, Velvet having brought to light the possibility of fighting against Angel kind if need be, and that Charlie could just as easily broke favor by her father, the literal king of hell, to get what she wants, right? Well, I bring this all up and not any of these will ever once cross Charlie's mind, so it's whatever. Angel is once again shooting for another porn skit at the behest of Val before Charlie butts in to Angel's utter shock. Charlie lets Angel know of her intentions and Angel doesn't feel too thrilled about that, no matter Charlie's own hierarchy in hell. I get that Angel is quite afraid of Val and what he might do to him, but I don't understand why he thinks Val could do anything to Charlie without getting the ire of her, the entire hotel staff, or her father, or maybe it's that Charlie is a fucking child disguised as an adult, as I just surmised. Before Angel can dismiss Charlie, Val is made aware of her and makes his disturbing proclivities quite well known, including licking her arm in a suggestive manner and trying to offer her a role. What is interesting is that he says that this would be a way to make the both of them more famous than her father, suggesting that Lucifer either has been absent for some time or has left his throne kingless for a more managerial position, which may well tie into the monologue from episode 1, suggesting how ashamed Lucifer became from his predicament. Why Lilith is not mentioned or even suggested as an issue for Val to come at Charlie this way will just have to be better saved for the literal final scene in the show and all the bullshit that comes with it, so for now, let's nip that in the bud. Val and Angel get back to the shoot, but Charlie, like the naive child she is, distracts one of the grips with advertising her hotel in the middle of it. She disrupts it so much that she decides to give pointers about how the scene should go before tripping a line that causes sparks to erupt from the mess of wires and destroy the entire set with it, Valentino having to step in and clear the flame, barely holding back his own anger. Now, if you've watched my Borderlands series by now, you know full well how I fucking hate humor at the expense of the character and the plot, and this entire sequence with Charlie having inadvertently destroyed Valentino's set is proof positive of such a thing. I know that this is supposed to segue into the next scene that got Twitter upset about, but I feel there could have been a much better way to go about facilitating that, rather than make Charlie this bumbling idiot despite being hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. You would think she would save the pep talk about her hotel until after the scene is done, wouldn't suggest pointers for a porn scene knowing full well what the scene is trying to accomplish, and would have some sort of demonic power to control this bevy of flame much better than in the pathetic way she did, but alas, this is what you get when you Flanderize a character, and it's not even the worst example of it. Valentino talks nice to Charlie about the mess she's made while consoling Angel to his dressing room, and thus, the scene plays out. I'm not going to split any hairs about what happens in this scene, believe me, enough people on social media have already done so I'll just outline it matter-of-factly. Valentino thrashes Angel across the dressing room without giving Angel an inch to speak, cursing Charlie as some sort of savior to his predicament with him while making it clear that he owns him contractually. Like a dog, Valentino expects him to obey at his every will, at least when it comes to matters of his business, and the show makes it extremely apparent how abusive this relationship Angel has with him is. There's no room for jokes, or interpretation, or ambiguity behind anything that's going on here, and yet, I've seen plenty of people come away thinking that this is making a disgrace of those who actually suffered from sexual abuse. Now, granted, this might be in relation to the first musical of this episode as well as some parts of the second musical, and even I have gone on record saying how disjointed the show is about how it wants us to feel about certain characters in a given moment, but this scene in isolation makes it abundantly clear that this is not a good thing. And if that's a take you can't handle, then sue me. But I honestly don't get how this scene could have made this more heavy-handed and how awful Angel's treatment is if it tried. I think the fact that so many of the so-called fans who already know what this show's setting and premise belies upon being as upset as they are proves that for all the talk about this show being edgy is nothing but a veneer. Ironically, the same veneer regarding Angel's promiscuity. But beyond that, there are some world-building issues with the things that Valentino brings up to Angel, as though the world-building of Hazbin Hotel wasn't already contrived. First and foremost, how does a economy exist or even work in a realm like hell? And what does having lots of money facilitate exactly in said realm? Of course, these things we intuit from living on Earth, but hell, for all intents, seemed to function no more than a dumping ground for the sinners to meet their inevitable demise by the exorcists. This is also why it often becomes confusing whether hell is supposed to be based on the biblical version of hell, or simply acts like a extreme version of Earth in form and function. And it seems that hell is synonymous with Earth for all things, save for the yearly purges in this show. The last thing Val wants Angel to do is get Charlie out of here, a bit ironic considering he already had planned on getting her out of here had not Val intervened, but regardless, this is just Val's way to assert his dominance over Angel, and he acquiesces, if hesitantly. They both storm back out of the studio and Val throws him aside, prompting Charlie to finally show her fangs for a brief moment, until Angel gets between the both and forces Charlie out, sobbing and upset. And with that comes the final destruction of whatever foundation of a character Charlie had in the pilot to now, so let's discuss the nature of Flanderization. If you aren't already in the know, Flanderization isn't a real word, but a conjunction of a character by the name of Ned Flanders, who over time during his depiction in The Simpsons had gone from a good-hearted Christian man into merely being a Bible-thumping evangel with only Jesus on the brain. In a similar manner, I've noticed that Charlie has been Flanderized from being a good-hearted darling of hell who still understood her station as being the princess of hell, to now just being a doorstop with no backbone, grit, or maturity behind her. A literal denizen of hell, who has been witness to likely countless purges, still cringes at the presence of sex, violence, and drugs at her age? A person who should hold a lot of authority and power in hell, being brought to tears because she can't clearly see how Valentino is abusing Angel to make her leave? More importantly, given episode 3 was all about Vaggie and Charlie working as a team, their dynamic being sword and shield, had Vaggie also been with Charlie to take witness of this, would likely remedy the meekness that Charlie gives off. But unfortunately, the more the show tries to liken Charlie to a baby, the less endearing it becomes, to the point of obnoxiousness that the show has become caged by the meta of fans believing Charlie needs to be forever protected in a cocoon. In the fucking pilot, Charlie clearly states that she learned from her dad to take shit from no one, and does stand up for herself against Katie Killjoy regarding the viability of her hotel. So this isn't just some headcanon I'm making up for the sake of complaining about how Charlie has been portrayed thus far. And given that the show does make the pilot canon means that we can't just write this off as a thematic change from paper to practice. And lastly, I understand that Valentino wanted this exact result to happen, that Angel would poison himself against her for fear of what Val might do to him. But if Charlie had any semblance of reading the room, should know full well why Angel is acting the way he is, which should give her more reason to retaliate against Valentino. This does not come off as someone who is well-traveled in the act of making deals, despite being told by Vaggie not to make deals with Alistair for one, or one who knows an abusive relationship when she sees one. At the end of the day, Charlie is no more mature than my niece is about these touchy subjects. Well, while this episode has its bad with regards to Charlie, it does come its good with arguably the best musical in the entire season. Although to call it a musical is a bit reductive, as it's more of a song with verse, chorus, while being filmed by Valentino like a music video, with these catchy dark pop beats a la Tears for Fear or New Order. Although, like with the sexual assault scene, the very sane and well-adjusted folks of Twitter thought this song was glorifying Angel's sexual assault because of the way Angel seems to be cheery-faced throughout his sexual deeds, as well as Valentino's own towards him. Like, I have to imagine these people also listened to 99 Red Balloons and thought that was endorsing the idea of nuclear warfare simply because it had robust and upbeat instrumentals behind it, ignoring the lyrics and cadence behind it. Even the message behind Poison is that Angel is putting on a face for Valentino's sake while grimacing through it all, vindicated in the imagery of his cheery persona juxtaposed with his bound and gagged self in the screen behind him. I know, me having to defend the show from these extremely troubling takes, despite me making this series because of how much this show upsets me, guess the sun sets in the east today, but yes, this song is good, even if it does retread what we already understand of Angel's predicament, and feels very akin to the song Addict when that was made a few years prior. But don't worry, the naysayers about how this episode does drop the ball on tackling this touchy subject matter will get some vindication in regards to the second musical, but we haven't got to that yet. Anyhow, Angel returns to the hotel from his ordeal, obviously flustered and needing something to wash the taste out of it. Husk tries to play therapist with Angel, which comes with its own difficulties, either that Angel continues to sexually harass Husk, or is deflective about what has him so troubled. Husk has headed up to here with Angel's advances, and once again chides him for his fakeness, a low blow for Angel given his prior reactions to it. Because of Husk's stoicism, Angel storms out even more upset than before, which prompts Vaggie and Charlie to suggest Husk go chase after him because of his goading of said outburst. Again, Charlie acts like a child by saying, "Ooh, he looked upset," as though the audience couldn't already tell by how Angel left the hotel. Although Charlie does display some maturity in suggesting that Husk don't bring him back, but just keep watch on him, as he'll naturally come to his senses to return to the hotel. So with that, Husk gives chase, being a bit generous with that term given his slouching his way over to wherever Angel went. Husk blends in with the crowd while eavesdropping on what Angel is doing, which is of course more copious amounts of drugs and alcohol, while boasting about his outburst towards Husk earlier. The drugs get so copious that when Angel asks for a refill, one of the goons slips in something extra in his glass, which may presumably be something tied to Valentino, given its smoky and pink hue. Husk notices this, which prompts him to intervene, throwing the goon into a jukebox, dragging Angel by the many arms he has, and disarming the other goons with his throwing cards, somehow sharp enough to do such a thing. Guess he went to the American McGee's Alice School of Weaponry. Anyhow, Angel is surprised and annoyed by why Husk is here, prompting Husk to state he jumped in when he saw someone was spiking his drink. Angel states that he knows full well how this song and dance goes in clubs like this, getting Husk more annoyed by Angel's willingness to be abused this way. The conversation gets more personal as Angel's own facade peels away, as Husk acts like the more personable version of a bartender, wanting Angel to be real with him. And in, we get one of the more raw performances from Blake Roman that really sold me on him being a suitable replacement over Michael Kovach's voice for Angel.
It's not an act! It's who I need to be! And this is my escape! Where I can forget about it all, how much I hate everything. A place where I can get high and not have to think about how much it hurts. And maybe, if I can ruin myself enough in the process, if I end up broken, I won't be his favorite toy anymore.
A lot of the dialogue between Husk and Angel is great throughout this exchange because we actually have an opportunity to meaningfully explore these characters rather than have to fast track or sticky note their characteristics, making episode 4 by far the best episode for me, even with the divisiveness this episode carries, or my frustrations with Charlie's flanderization as a character. As Angel curls up, Husk tries to comfort Angel by saying how he used to be an overlord himself until he played his hand, literally and figuratively, suggesting that he became subservient to Alistair, which would make sense given the way in which Alistair had Husk come to the hotel against his own volition. After that exposition dump, we get our second musical, Loser, Baby, which also had its fair share of criticism regarding how it tackles coping with the abuse these two shared. And I have to agree, because we don't get a clear idea as to the nature of how Husk ended up being chained to Alistair in comparison to Angel. I don't think it's a good look for Husk to try to compare the situations as equally shitty when Alistair has thus far been quite passive to how Husk behaves himself. I get the idea that Husk is trying to cheer up Angel by making it clear that he isn't the only one uniquely fucked in this situation, but as we've seen thus far, Alistair hasn't taken advantage of Husk to the same degree Valentino has Angel. As for the song, it's definitely catchy in its own way, like a modern Frank Sinatra ballad with some heavier guitar notes, but the usual problems with the musicals do fly in, like how Angel was able to improv a perfectly rhymed and on-meter lyric to complement Husk's, and I don't take Husk as the singing type, even noting Keith David's repertoire. The song gets cut short by the goons at the bar, who somehow brandish a new set of guns and open fire on the two, ensuing the first fight scene we've gotten in this show. And I got to say, the choreography is a bit fucked. The four gunmen just suddenly stop the moment Husk throws his cards, and it's not exactly clear what he did to them, with it as soon as Angel starts dishing his own lead, the other gangsters get shot off screen as though they were completely stun-locked when Husk was fighting some of the other gangsters. I make a mention of this because these fight animations will get more fucked the more elaborate they become, and for as flashy as they are, it is not the show's strong suit. The two return to the hotel with renewed spirits, which effectively ends this episode, but not before the writers can really emphasize the humor of Charlie being a big old baby by quite literally acting like one when apologizing and being forgiven by Angel Dust for what she was trying to do for him. As I said before,
not happy
with the way Charlie is presented this way. And that was it for this episode, and with that, my YouTube career, as I'm sure I've successfully pissed off every possible corner of the internet with the way I went about tackling said episode. But I'll just say it again just to put more salt on the wound. This is the best episode in this show in comparison to my feelings of episode 4 of the Wednesday show when I tackled that. Unfortunately, though, that means that episode 4 is about as good as it's going to get, and whatever qualities I can muster for this episode are just to soften the blow of what episode 5 and 6 will bring to me. Now, if you've watched this series thus far, you might have caught on that I've made a lot of comparisons to the Wednesday Netflix show in regards to certain plot beats and contrivances. This isn't done arbitrarily just because Wednesday is still fresh on my tongue like herpes-riddled Tums, but because I notice a conspicuous number of similarities between it and Hazbin Hotel that go far beyond just the two of them being a 8-episode season. For example, between episode 4 and 5 of Wednesday, there was a noticeable time jump between what happened at the end of episode 4 to 5, which was done as a way to accelerate certain plot beats for minor characters and nothing more. And wouldn't you know it, Hazbin Hotel does the same, and even more egregiously than Wednesday did. If you remember from episode 1, Adam gave Charlie a 6-month window to figure out her social experiment before the next purge, and in episode 5, we start with Charlie bloodshot and panicking that she now only has a few months before the next purge. So yes, somehow in the span of just 3 episodes, we've managed to skip a whole season's, ironic, worth of potential character development or even establishing the issues with Hazbin Hotel as a means to redeem sinners, all done to accelerate the tension of the next purge, which makes the arbitrarily expediting of it more contrived, as you could just as easily have an 8 to 10 month jump and still have the same circumstances apply, but that would still require some amount of building up our characters if the show even got a proper season treatment, rather than feeling like a mere appetizer stretched thin into a 3-course meal. So, because things are looking a bit dire, Vaggie suggests the unthinkable, asking Charlie's dad for help. The only reason that Charlie seems to oppose this is that her dad was the one who allowed these purges to happen to begin with, which is quite contrary to the literal monologue she was reading in episode 1, where Heaven decided of their own volition to do so because of Lilith's growing influence over Hell. Unless Charlie means that Lucifer allowed these to go on unabated as a result of his losing faith in his dream, this doesn't coincide. In fact, Charlie displays almost bipolar tendencies as she quickly changes her tune on asking her father for help on the basis that he could get her set up with a meeting to go to heaven. At least in this case, not with Adam helming said meeting, I assume. Also, because as though the show didn't already spotlight it enough thus far, Husks asks Charlie if she has daddy issues on her reticence to call him. Yep, it was not funny the last 4 times you did it, and it's still not funny the 5th time. I'm sure you'll have me want to get a vasectomy for my eardrums if you do it a 6th time. Charlie opines on what Husk said by mentioning that her parents split over something. We won't know yet, but if I'm being honest, I don't know if the show ever explains what caused them to split, other than the implication that Lilith's ideals of empowering Hell went against Lucifer's ideals. But regardless, because of this, Lucifer became distant to Charlie, and by fucking god, it would be so on brand with the show, what with the daddy issue illusions and the title of this goddamn episode, to also make Lucifer out to be some deadbeat, because apparently that's all that Vivian knows how to write. As for the man himself, we are finally introduced to him, preoccupied with making rubber ducks. Yeah, what with the fact that he makes these almost as a distraction to what else is going around and is almost confused by his daughter calling him, did the show give Lucifer autism? He even has socially awkward tendencies that I've had with talking to people I don't know too well in the context of him calling his daughter, as though he hasn't worked out this whole being a father thing. I don't know if that's what they're trying to characterize him as, but hey, I suppose this show did indeed subvert my expectations by him not being a deadbeat. The conversation between Lucifer and Charlie is extremely awkward, mainly that Lucifer has been so absent-minded about what else is going on around him that even things like knowing about Charlie's hotel or their advertisements are unknown to him. So, taken from that, I am to believe that Lucifer was likely so dismayed by his exile that he distracted himself with a single-minded goal of making rubber ducks to the duress of everything else. And hey, this is some really great subtext that isn't just told verbatim, unlike the constant daddy issues parable thrown recklessly thus far. Charlie wants Lucifer to give her a meeting to heaven to assess the viability of her hotel, which is the only thing Lucifer confidently stamps down against. Charlie pleads that she doesn't ask many favors from him, and that if he's doubtful, that he should see the hotel for himself to judge its viability. Lucifer seems elated by that prospect, pointing to his depression as the reason he wants to go, which makes whatever subtext I just praised a moment ago futile. You really just know how to ruin a good thing, don't ya, Hazbin Hotel? Because Lucifer is arriving in an hour, Charlie and Vaggie spur the other hotel staff in making the hotel presentable for when he arrives. I should also make it a point that when Lucifer arrives, the show writers make it apparent that while he's top dog, he's sorely lacking in height, although given that someone small like Charlie is around 6 foot tall apparently, isn't really saying much about him. Also of note is that Alistair, while present, has some subtleties in his expression that seem to imply unpleasantness with Lucifer coming over, which is meant to foreshadow a rivalry these two have that will come completely out of left field for me and everybody watching it. Anyhow, Lucifer isn't exactly sure how to take his surroundings, trying to be polite in a similar veneer to Charlie before taking abhorrence at Alistair's bar setup, prompting Alistair to respond and retort, making his own sly comment about Lucifer's height. Lucifer doesn't seem aware nor remotely intimidated by Alistair or his antics from yore, giving him the moniker of Has Been, as per the name of the hotel, before Alistair gets his first swear out in response. Quite funny because of how normally mild-mannered and in control Alistair is in most situations. Charlie tries to squash the beef between the two by selling other amenities of the hotel while also being grateful of Alistair's contributions to it. Alistair takes advantage of her gratefulness by grating on Lucifer's jealousy, getting Lucifer to quickly change the subject to meet her other friends. She first introduces Lucifer to Vaggie, getting a bit of a reaction by Lucifer, shocked that she'd be into girls. Which, I don't know if the show is trying to imply Lucifer is homophobic, or that he genuinely was surprised. Frankly, I'm 50-50 on that being the case given the heavy-handedness of him possibly being a deadbeat. Might as well make him bigoted too! The other interactions between the hotel staff are one note and is cut short by a chandelier inexplicably falling behind him, which also inexplicably starts the first musical, I guess because Lucifer sees that he needs to help Charlie because of his setback. Frankly, the pacing of episode 5 is by far the worst that I've seen in this show thus far. Don't even get me started on episode 6, with how it needs to quickly establish things with no fanfare to go on. So what about Hell's Greatest Dad? Well, as I said earlier, it very suddenly and awkwardly tries to establish that Alistair has now attached himself as a surrogate father figure to Charlie, seemingly between the months of trying and failing to get this hotel going. Yeah, where in the other living fuck was that, or even implied as such, between the last 4 episodes? Honestly, it seems Alistair for the entirety of the show up to this point didn't even care if it succeeded or failed, and just contributed to it out of his own amusement. Something that he even expressed in the pilot, which remember, still canon by the show's standards. Granted, for all I know, Alistair is just poisoning himself as Charlie's father to get under Lucifer's skin, or that Alistair needs to do this to set up his not-so-disguised and possible arrangement with Lilith that we'll get into later in this episode, but it's extremely hard to read the true intentions of Alistair. In fact, while I was looking up other information secondhand about the show, I found a blurb where Vivian clarified in a Q&A that Alistair only acted like a father figure to Charlie to set up a rivalry between Lucifer. Glad to know that I have to find this ancillary information just so I don't think Alistair has ulterior motives to do this, only to find out that Alistair is actually just extremely petty behind the awe of mystery that is his smirk. As for the song itself, it has all the same pitfalls of musicals that I don't like about them, but there's an extra layer of self-insistence this song puts upon itself, whether that's the rivalry duet that Aleister and Lucifer share, the baffle them with bullshit vomit of colors, sounds, and visuals, even if some are on par with Lucifer as a deitic being, and most annoyingly, how the character Mimsy slots herself into the story. Like, how did Mimsy know exactly when to arrive at the hotel for such a circumstance to sing along to whatever these two characters she likely doesn't know were singing to, or assume that anyone would know who she is? As I said, it almost feels as though there was no excuse for this to be a musical because of the manner in which the dialogue and plot beats are delivered, because whether by Vivienne's hand or Amazon's, two musicals must be had, no more, no less. Mimsy, like with Zestial and Carmine, was also a JPEG image cameo in the pilot who once again gets upgraded to no more than B-plot filler for episode 5, as her intentions for coming here are not exactly genuine. Of course, no one knows who she is save for Aleister, who, as apparently the two have some history together when they were mortals, and given Mimsy's Flapper Girl setup, means Aleister likely was alive during the Roaring 20s. The 1920s for you Zoomers out there. I guess this is a small aside for world building, but wouldn't it be a conundrum for sinners to be able to recall their past lives in such a way as to plan revenge on those in the mortal plane, a la the immediate murder professionals? Furthermore, how does heaven exactly account for Hellborn coming into contact or even meddling with affairs on Earth in such a way as to lead them into becoming sinners themselves? Shouldn't there be something like in the Supernatural show where angels poison themselves as normal humans to flush out any demonic affluence on Earth, so that normal people don't succumb to dark temptations? Anyhow, Charlie and Lucifer don't have the time to give pleasantries to Mimsy as they were already preoccupied with showing around the hotel, which establishes the B-plot as to Mimsy's intentions of coming here now of all things. Husk is obviously not pleased with Mimsy being here for reasons we can get into, and Angel Dust is surprised that Aleister even had friends of note, prompting Mimsy to exposit on Aleister's backstory in a way similar to when Vaggie described Aleister to him. Yeah, about the pilot apparently being canon, well, considering that Angel already got what Aleister's deal was to Vaggie, why would he need to ask Mimsy essentially the same thing? And the only additional bit of info we get about Aleister is the manner in which he traps his victims through a radio frequency as opposed to the pilot. If Sir Pentious asked Mimsy what Aleister's deal was, this would be more justified, even in the context of Mimsy saying all of this while both Pentious and Angel are hearing all this, but here, I guess they forgot they made the pilot canon. Mimsy asks for another drink, but finds that Husk has left his duties to chase after Aleister to have some words with him, mainly to do with Mimsy. Husk doesn't approve of Mimsy being here, as she has a tendency to bring trouble along with her to have her friends bail her out of it. This derails slightly into a tangent about questioning Aleister's absence in relation to his power, getting Husk upset to the point that he lashes out, which in turn forces Aleister's hand.
Big talk for someone who's also on a leash.
What did you say?
Nothing,
If you ever say that again, I will tear your soul apart and broadcast your screams for every other disrespectful wretch who dares to question me.
Understood?
Lovely.
So, several things to talk about in regards to this scene. Remember how I said in episode 4 how the naysayers would get their comeuppance in regards to how this show treats the nature of abuse? Well, they get it again here, because up to this point the show has been very loosey-goosey on Aleister's morals that I almost suspect the show writers forgot that he had Husk, and possibly to the same extent Nifty, contractually obligated to do his bidding up until Husk said something that would upset Aleister to some degree. You can't imagine how polarizing the feelings are about Aleister in relation to Valentino, in spite of the fact both of them have enslaved people to their will. It doesn't matter if Aleister is more polite about it. A house Negro by any other name is still a slave to the plantation owners, even if they get it easier than the ones picking the cotton. Secondly, as has been alluded to in episode 1 and 2 chiefly, Husk again implies Aleister's likely deals with Lilith, as it can't just be a coincidence that the two of them have been absent from Hell for the same amount of time. But if that is the case, and Husk knows about this, Wouldn't that be something Husk would want to impart to Charlie, if for nothing else but a chance of being freed from Alistair's chains? Or that Charlie would want to know if Alistair's intentions to helping the hotel aren't just purely out of amusement, but by Lilith's hand. If that even is why Alistair went here to begin with? Again, we can't really know for certain if that is the case, but at the very least, it would behoove Husk to let Charlie know that Alistair's reasons for going here are not entirely his own, wouldn't it? Back to the A-plot, Charlie finalizes the tour with her dad, who seems to either be absent-minded on what she's trying to propose to him, or trying to avoid discussing anything regarding redeeming sinners in hell. Lucifer swallows his pride, ironic, and says that while he's grateful that Charlie wants to redeem sinners, that he doesn't see them as capable of redemption, echoing a harsh sentiment that Adam cartoonishly said during episode 1. Although in contrast to Adam, the reason Lucifer believes this is that his opinions about heaven are low while their standards are abnormally high. Oh, we'll have words about that, won't we? Something that the sinners wouldn't be able to acclimate towards. The bickering continues between Charlie and Lucifer, the former wanting to give it her best shot, while the latter states that Charlie shouldn't risk her neck out for those who don't want to be saved to begin with, until the sour B plot rears its head with some loan sharks wanting Mimsy to pay her dues. The sharks lay siege on the hotel, something I'm surprised they were even able to do without Lucifer board wiping the shit out of them before they could say pride. But alas, Lucifer uses this as a way to prove his point about sinners taking a mile for every inch Charlie gives. So, who else to save them but Alistair, who, like with Sir Pentious, handedly deals with the lone sharks. Lucifer again tries to use this as a sticking point, but Charlie counters that Alistair is trying to defend the hotel, and in a way, the idea the hotel represents. Disappointed that her own father can't even believe in her dreams. I know this is going to be a footnote for what the next musical entails, and possibly some semblance of a theme going for this show, but man, they really don't miss an opportunity to make every father figure between Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss unlikable in some regard. Alistair finishes his rampage while Mimsy tries to flagellate him on account of her bringing this trouble in the first place, but Alistair sees right through her, asking her to leave if she isn't genuinely interested in redemption. Again, where did Alistair suddenly get altruistic about the ideals of this hotel between episode 1 to now, huh? Am I just supposed to assume that in the 4-month gap between episode 4 and 5, which, bear in mind, was apparently wrapped with failure from Charlie, that he thinks this is worth a shot? Like, if Charlie was remotely and consistently successful, I could then see why Alistair would think this way, but by what we've seen, there should be no reason that Alistair thinks this way, even if he's just saying this more so because Mimsy had ill intentions to come to the hotel. So, with the B plot done, we can finish up on the A plot and get our government-mandated second musical going too. Charlie pleads her father help her, and exasperated, Lucifer bawls that heaven didn't listen to his dreams, and that he can't bring himself to see Charlie crushed in a similar way to him. More than anything, cues up sort of neatly with their discussion, even if the manner in which this becomes a musical is as contrived as ever. Still, at least it's more reserved in the instrumental and visual department, coming off as this slow burn acoustic duet that does bear on wholesome with the relation these two share. The most revealing things about this instrumental is that Charlie, while young, was enchanted by Lucifer's dreams, visualized in this diorama of a swan with biblically accurate angel wings at the center of some sort of solar system. So as I said back in episode 1, it's a bit contradictory for Charlie to insist that she'll continue Lilith's dream, when ultimately her dreams were based on her father's dreams, whatever this image is supposed to symbolize. Second of note is that Lilith, faceless, took Charlie away from her father to do his thing, again making me speculate that Lilith's desires do not fall in line with Lucifer's, compounding the confusion of Charlie wanting to continue Lilith's dream if it's diametrically opposed to Lucifer's, the dream she ultimately wants. Additionally, because these two find commonality behind what they desire, they hope in that they can rekindle their relationship and not be apart again. But honestly, what was keeping them apart in the first place? It wasn't like Lucifer was scared to go to the hotel because of his depression. In fact, he was raring to go the moment Charlie gave him an invitation? Was it that he was unsure of what Charlie may think of him if he wasn't willing to go through with her plan? Because that doesn't coincide with Charlie wanting desperately to be in contact with him. The only rogue element in all of this is that Lilith must have forced this separation by the flashback Charlie gives, but for what reason we can only speculate by what I've already surmised. After the musical, Lucifer says that he can set Charlie up with a meeting to heaven, but that he won't be able to go with her once he does, likely on account of him being exiled in that pardon that he and Charlie inexplicably have regarding purges. Vaggie asks Charlie if she's ready, and she says yes, mainly because Vaggie will be there with her, getting a interesting reaction from her. And oh, won't we have a lot to say about that and all that comes with episode 6, won't we? But that was episode 5, and like clockwork, has all the same problems with that episode 1 has, and then some, reminding me again that episode 4 was merely lubing up my asshole before I get metaphorically sodomized by what this episode and episode 6 will bring me. And speaking of, let's get this next episode over with. I might as well get this out of the way before we delve into episode 6, as I've not made my feelings about it unknown prior to doing this analysis. Episode 6 is by far the worst episode in Hazbin Hotel. It is so bad, in fact, that it killed any hope that I would come away with the show being mostly middling from episode 1 going onward, and that me merely making a small rant video on it would not suffice my utter disdain of it top to bottom. I have noticed that with certain media of this quality that there is a point where it jumps the shark. Wednesday's episode 7 was that, the sequence where Moxie betrays Jack's crew in the pre-sequel was that, and a particular line in this episode, as well as everything surrounding it, will do that. So let's get to it, shall we? We start with Charlie and Vaggie preparing their trip to heaven, Charlie a bit anxious on account of it being her likely last chance to prove redemption a possibility. Vaggie again tries to squirm her way out of going to heaven with her, but can't stomach a good excuse and is charmed by Charlie's demeanor to go. Meanwhile, Angel Dust comes back from yet another exhausting day doing Valentino's dirty work, and oh, won't that be relevant for the tone deafness this episode in particular illustrates, before yet another random explosion assaults the hotel, keeping in tone with the running gag of that particular side of the hotel getting bombarded upon. This is a way to reintroduce Cherry Bomb to the picture, who came on account of Angel Dust's prior stress of the work day. Why in the hell didn't Cherry Bomb go through the front door or come by in the 5 fucking months Angel has been here is left a mystery to me, but again, meta-narrative reasons go beyond the character's own. The reasons for Cherry Bomb showing up at this time is fourfold, 2 of which we can get into later and the other 2 we can get into right now. As a way for Charlie to come up with the idea for Cherry and Angel to bring the hotel staff on vacation while Charlie and Vaggie go to heaven, and for Cherry Bomb to exacerbate Angel's inhibitions further. Why that will be relevant for this episode we shall see soon, but for now, why Charlie suddenly trusts Cherry Bomb to do this for them on nothing else but being Angel's friend, especially not knowing whether Cherry would do something uncouth to her interests of redemption, is yet again a contrivance this episode in particular allows for her future development in said episode, further poisoning Charlie as irresponsible and immature. So Charlie and Vaggie leave the hotel staff to their own devices, in both meanings of the word, as they catch a portal to heaven. Before we can get into that, Cherry Bomb's introduction also awkwardly starts a relationship with Sir Pentious, despite the 2 of them literally being at each other's neck for turf during the last purge. And I can only assume this was done as to appeal to the fans who crack-shipped them hard. Talk about audience capture, am I right? But seriously, where was the chemistry to even imply such a thing in the pilot? Although I suppose this show also decides that Angel Dust and Husk have a thing for each other too, simply based on Angel Dust's advances towards him, which, Vivienne, telling your audience that you can woo someone if you harass them long enough isn't exactly the lesson you should be telling us. Charlie and Vaggie walk up to them pearly gates with one St. Peter who tries to keep them entering in the first place. Okay, This isn't a adaptation issue, but more so with a real-life issue with the depiction of this St. Peter, as that isn't just a moniker but a name given to an actual person who existed at some point of history. And looking at what he likely looked like compared to here is a bit of a curious decision to me to have St. Peter not only deceptive, unusually zoomerish in appearance, but also noseless too. St. Peter is told to step aside by the introduction of the Seraphim, portrayed currently by one Emily and Sarah. And yes, I am not fucking joking with you, that is her literal name. It'd be like if I named a ring wraith in the Lord of the Rings, Eighth. Like, goddamn, at least come up with a name that didn't take you a microsecond to come up with. Regardless, the Seraphim, at least as I understand them, are of the highest tiers of heaven, second only to God. Except that because this show already established that there are no gods, that Seraphim in this universe would be the equivalent to gods. This is very important for what will be dropped on our laps like hot concrete shit to understand just how vile this show portrays heaven, as we will soon discover. Sarah is the older and more calm-natured of the two, Emily coming off as a surrogate daughter to Sarah and a counterpart to Charlie by her upbeat and bright nature. Unfortunately, Emily also shares the exuberant naivete that Charlie has displayed thus far as well, to the point of making Emily one of the most unlikable characters by far, somehow being neck and neck with Adam of all people. I should also mention that the comparisons to Emily and Charlie are so razor thin to the point that not only do they share the same look and mannerisms, but that they sound the same to each other, as I previously joked that she looked like a reskin of Charlie. And this may be more deliberate than as most would see as lazy, as we will also discover soon. Since the Seraphim gave Charlie and Vaggie their blessing, in comes the first musical violating my eardrums.
Welcome to heaven.
This is by far the most forgettable of the musicals that we've thus heard, whether that's to do with the really obnoxious glitzy pops mixed with church organs, the way that yet again this musical is thrown at us like audio whiplash, or that there was no reason for this to be a musical in the first place, as it's merely an advertisement for the perks of being in heaven. The only narrative reason for this to be here now of all things is to soften the blow of the true evil that this show decides heaven must be, that we'll find out soon, or to put in stark contrast to how heaven sells itself as idealistic, when in actuality it is anything but. As Charlie and Vaggie are quickly off to make themselves at home, they pass by Adam and Lute, unbeknownst to them. Yay! I had almost washed the taste out of my mouth about Adam being a thing in this show. I'm glad that I'll have to metaphorically clean my insides of him with bleach now. Anyhow, as being the clowns that they are, the two are upset that Charlie and Vaggie are here. What they briefly established through their suggestions of going after them is that the purges are a secret that the exorcists must keep to themselves as mandated by the Seraphim. So, let's discuss how damaging this revelation is to the nature of these purges, as well as to heaven by extension. So, remember how I said in episode 3 that the sheer manpower needed to go about these purges would be in the tens of millions? How in the fuck could the Seraphim ever hope that the exorcists, much less fucking Adam, keep this a secret with as many that have to partake in it? Adam has been characterized as a douche bro with the bravado of a goddamn silverback gorilla. Does Sarah really expect him to stay quiet about how many sinners he's killed for as long as he's lived? As for the Seraphim themselves, the fact that the Seraphim are keeping this a secret means that they know what they're doing would be opposed by the rest of the denizens of heaven, regardless of the concern of power burgeoning in hell, a power of which we have still yet to establish could even become a direct threat to heaven, mind you. So, this ultimately means that the Seraphim are going about this wanton act of indiscriminate destruction, knowing that it would not be approved based on a goddamn hunch, and I'm supposed to believe that these deitic beings are smart enough to rationalize for a ear-splitting second the idea of repenting? Oh, and don't worry, this lampshading of heaven's stupid villainy will only get worse as we go on. I should also mention that the design choice for Lute not to wear her mask, despite Adam having his on, a bit muddling. I naturally assume that the way the exorcists look was how they actually are, and not that it's used as a veil, not unlike a executioner. The problem with this logic, of course, is that if heaven believes that the sinners can't be redeemed, means it wouldn't be useful for angels to hide their faces to do their deeds, as they wouldn't come across these sinners in the afterlife. As for why Adam chooses to wear his mask always, also apparently he can just drink and eat through it too, I can only speculate that he loves killing sinners so much that the mask bears a likeness to that thrill of his, as cartoonishly evil as that thought is. Sarah jumps the two of them to scold them for their silly ways, although I can't really blame them when the entirety of heaven is the goddamn circus, so that Luke can ask Sarah what Charlie and Vaggie are doing here. What extra details we get is that apparently Adam was the one who came up with the idea of purges, and that Sarah acquiesced, if only believing that would stymie the unrest partaking in hell. Why in the seraphim damned fuck did Sarah think this would when she hadn't any proof of hell trying to bring down heaven any other time before, unfortunately makes Sarah one of the dumbest fucking characters in this show. At least, for now. But yes, despite Charlie having claimed that Lucifer allowed the purges to happen, and that the monologue stated that the angels were the ones who championed the purges to happen, we now get a third contradictory bit of information as to the origin of these purges. Although, with Adam being characterized as he is, this actually would make sense given his homicidal tendencies, but conversely, I really fucking hate how this show can't decide on what it wants to be its major reveal for something as pivotal as the nature of these purges. Charlie is taken in by the blinding lights of heaven, while Vaggie is not the least bit amused, wanting nothing but to sulk in their room. This allots Adam and Lute to barge in, and in we discover that Vaggie was, dun dun dun, an exorcist herself. Before we can talk about the many ways in this seriously damages the story that only Adam and Lute knew of her past deeds, we gotta talk about the backstory of Vaggie while she was in exorcist mode. So, Adam first states that he named her Vaggie after a vagina, because, you know, douche bro with barely disguised misogyny would do so on her performance as a exorcist. In the flashback, Vaggie inexplicably takes her mask off, as though just to wave to the audience that exorcist is indeed Vaggie, because how the fuck else would you without her doing that for no discernible reason? Adam mentions that Vaggie screwed up by taking slight pity on a random child before getting herself seriously wounded by another exorcist for this defiance, presumably said exorcist being Lute. Gravely wounded, Vaggie crawls to some dank alleyway before being discovered and resuscitated by Charlie, which effectively ends the flashback, and now we can discuss all the problems with this reveal and the flashback. So, even before this show came out, a lot of fans had already speculated that Vaggie might have been an exorcist, as the similarities with her exed eye and the spear she wields are uncanny. But that likely the show would account for this by recognizing that in spite of Vaggie having taken part in The Exorcist herself, is now doing her part to stop them happening. Because this fucking show doesn't, however, means there is a huge contrivance for everyone who doesn't seem to recognize those similarities, especially that of Charlie, or better yet, Lucifer, who must have known that Vaggie was a exorcist by the way he incorrectly calls her Maggie, presumably out of respect of her knowing where she got that name, and apparently didn't feel of import to let Charlie know that she was boinking a exorcist at any point. And given that at the time of Lucifer having met Vaggie that he wasn't on board with Charlie's plan of redemption, you would think he would mention that as a way to dissuade her from doing so. Would he not? Unless I'm reading way too much into Lucifer calling her Maggie simply as a mistake, that still doesn't account for the numerous other ways that Vaggie would have had to keep her past in check. So, you know that little spear she constantly threatens everyone with? If she ever once used it on somebody, would have immediately given the game away that she is an exorcist, seeing as these are the methods of which sinners are permanently purged. And apparently, not once did any of the people she threatened with spear point out notice the odd similarities with it and the spears the exorcist used too. Or better yet, the
incredible luck.
of Vaggie not only having not chased after Charlie to the initial meeting back in episode 1, but that Charlie herself didn't feel to have Vaggie tag along to said meeting, or that Adam and Lute didn't feel compelled to mention this to Charlie when they first met her, despite apparently knowing that she was in a relationship with Vaggie for some time. Even worse, let's also examine the nature of this flashback as another contrivance as to how Vaggie's origins were immediately not apparent. So, this episode explicitly establishes that angels bleed yellow in comparison to red. And yet, when Charlie finds Vaggie bleeding out, that not one drop of it was near or on Vaggie for her to find curious? Or the fact that Vaggie's halo, or her getup, seemingly dropped from her passing out from the initial blood loss? Or better yet, the curious trail of blood that Vaggie was clearly leaving behind as she groveled across the alleyway too? Either that Charlie is completely inept at deducing anything, which, hey, quite apropos for her with this show thus far, or there are some serious bullshit happening for this to even happen in the first place. Other problems with the flashback take place, like for one, the fact that Vaggie's name is not just a joke that Angel calls attention to, but that she was seemingly granted it by Adam as a euphemism for said reproductive organ. So, does that mean that exorcists aren't given names prior to being enlisted for this service, and that Adam has to name all the exorcists that come into his ranks? Because I seriously hate the idea that her name sounding like something crude is indeed alluding to that crudeness, just to have some poetic irony to it all. Second of shitville with this flashback is what I already complained about, with Vaggie taking off her mask for no reason. If I am to assume that the purpose of the mask is to hide who is doing the killing, as to not create a bias against said executor, then Vaggie doing this while being completely on board with the purges is completely nonsensical. Thirdly, the manner in which Lute takes Vaggie out of the picture. If Lute found Vaggie's insolence so abhorrent that she was willing to cut out her eye and wings, why not kill her too? What use is Vaggie being here unless somehow Lute knew that the demons would finish her off, which will come at a cross once we establish what angels are weak to in episode 7. Furthermore, given that Adam and Lute made it a big deal that an exorcist was killed in their last purge, wouldn't the absence of their best exorcist at that time raise questions from Sarah, the one who's doing these purges, because of the veiled threat that hell poses to heaven? Better yet, it's also odd that Sarah herself doesn't seem to recognize Vaggie as a fallen angel at any point in this episode either, despite sharing many similarities with The Exorcist 2. Fourth and last is the decision that Vaggie makes to spare this child. The existence of this demon child poses more questions about the morality of these purges, either that they willingly kill offspring of sinners or offspring of Hellborn, beings of which have not yet had the capability to sin, but the exorcists kill them anyway, making what I already ascribed as indescribably evil more so because of the lack of discrimination as to who they kill, despite apparently having exceptions to Charlie and Lucifer for stupid reasons. Furthermore, why would killing a child be the breaking point of Vaggie to not go through with this, as opposed to being either desensitized or finding the cause stagnant to the pursuit of protecting heaven from hell? What difference does one body make if you're literally stacking them by the thousands at this venture? Who knows? All I know is that despite me going on and on about the stupidity of this reveal, this is still not where the episode, and by extension the show, jumps the shark, if you can believe that. Geez, and we haven't even discussed why Lute and Adam are bringing this up to Vaggie now of all things. Basically, Adam and Lute threaten to spill the beans on Vaggie's dirty little secret to Charlie unless she works against her ideals. Before we find out what Vaggie thinks of this, let's think of the ways in which this tactic would go badly for the two of them. First off, considering that Charlie has been quick to forgive literal strangers for their deceitfulness, that Charlie was quick to let bygones be bygones with her father presumably allowing the exorcisms to happen. This guilt that Adam and Lute are trying to hang over Vaggie's head won't work. Granted, Adam and Lute don't know that's how Charlie operates, but Vaggie does. So for her to even have hesitation to this is astounding. Secondly, Given that Vaggie has not once been insincere about making Charlie's dream come true, wouldn't it be more noble that Vaggie, despite having taken part in such a heinous act, is now doing everything she can to prevent it happening had Charlie known? I made it a criticism in my initial impressions that Vaggie could have led in some subtext to Charlie about her true countenance as an angel, not knowing that the show did have some sprinkled in, so kudos to that. But the criticism in regards to that is more so to do with how no one but Adam knew of Vaggie's past. Thirdly, if Adam and Lute were to blurt out that Vaggie was an angel, and that Vaggie had to arrive in heaven the same way that Charlie did, wouldn't that give pause to Sarah why she wasn't accounted for, nor presumably able to go to heaven, to the point that it would almost second-guess Adam's suggestion of the purges being the only viable strategy if Vaggie, being an exorcist at one time, wasn't willing to go through with it? But alas, I'm assuming that Adam and Lute are more than just single-minded clown people, like with Lute's blatant homophobia of Vaggie's relationship and Adam's womanizing view of said relationship. So, I ask again, even if it's a fruitless one, what exactly is moral to Adam in the purview of heaven? He finds hell such a blight to him that he finds the purges the only way to cleanse it, yet finds what Vaggie and Charlie got going for them attractive, takes part in many an act of debauchery, swears like a sailor, and is overall unpleasant to be around. What is the difference between what Adam does and what he views as sinful in his eyes? This is profoundly why it makes no sense for Adam to be like this, yet we're also supposed to believe that he sees the values of hell as anathema to heaven, when if anything, hell was made for him. Oh, that's right, because he's the main antagonist of the show, and the only way you can make someone an antagonist in this show is to make them a bonkers lunatic with no consistent values or goals in mind. And now we can get into the meeting proper, where whatever flimsy foundation Hazbin Hotel had left completely falls apart. Charlie is displeased to see Adam here of all places, while Adam makes his slimy remarks to her as per usual. Sarah opens the meeting to discuss whether a soul in hell is, or can be, worthy of redemption. She gives the floor to Charlie, but before she can opine, Adam interrupts like the crock of shit that he is. Although I suppose reading dictionary definitions isn't a good starting point for your argument, as Adam is impatiently waiting for some proper evidence of Charlie's proposal. Like in the pilot, Charlie uses angel dust as the springboard of her success with said experiment, prompting Adam to scoff at such a notion. Charlie asks Adam if he knows what it takes for someone to get into heaven, and like a clown, he can't answer the question but has to write up one on the spot. But in spite of this buffoonish behavior that Adam is exhibiting, there may be more merit to why he can't think of any on the spot, because as I fucking said, you can't blame a clown for acting the way they do when they live in the goddamn circus. The notes that Adam sends forth to Charlie's table are as follows: act selfless, don't steal, and stick it to the man. All things that I'm sure that Adam has done the opposite of in heaven, but regardless, Charlie needs to prove that Angel is doing those very things. I should also mention how incongruous it is that stick it to the man is apparently a virtue in heaven, despite that Adam is having this meeting on behalf of the man, but as I said, that's me assuming Adam has any principles. Charlie asserts that Angel is exhibiting those things, and Adam says, bet, and conjures a projection of what Angel is currently occupied with. Also, like in the pilot, they use the same joke that Angel is very much not doing what Charlie says he's doing, making this obvious joke come from a mile away. This also allows the B-plot of what the hostel's staff are getting up to happen, as the Council of Heaven are all spectating this. We get more of Sir Pentious awkwardly trying to hit on Cherry Bomb, while trying to obfuscate his doing of that by getting everybody involved in his shenanigans. Yeah, it's all in good fun until you take that joke just a little too far, don't it? But we'll get to that. Angel continues to complain about what Val's got him doing, prompting Cherry to slip in something special to make his night a bit more palatable. Husk tries to dissuade Angel into doing so on account of his current progress with the hotel. Angel is of two minds about it, but eventually caves into pressure, getting a sly remark from Adam, who's viewing all of this. This gets Charlie to object on account of not only Adam having partaken in a bit of debauchery himself, the fucking dumbass, but that partaking in drinks shouldn't be seen as a sin in the eyes of heaven. Oh, if only she knew. Despite this, Charlie pleads that they just need to see more to understand the values that Angel holds, getting Sarah a bit doubtful, but Emily wants to give Charlie a fighting chance, prompting more of that B-plot. What is especially daunting is that Charlie excitedly proclaims, "Fuck yes!" getting a look of disapproval by Sarah despite Adam constantly swearing throughout this entire council hearing. Yeah, what exactly is heaven morals in regards to language exactly? Wouldn't Sarah hold Adam in much higher regard than a hellborn demon not to swear? But geez, that's just me assuming that heaven has any standards on language. Back to B-plot, the hotel staff get turned up on the drinks to the point that Nifty is dizzy from all of it, prompting Angel to try to corral Nifty from further intoxication. Nifty continues to wander off and gets into the supply closet, Cherry Bomb curious as to why Angel is concerning himself with watching over her over anything else. As though what Angel is doing isn't already on the nose with what Charlie is trying to prove to the council, Angel is just looking out for Nifty's best interests and gets her distracted with playing with Husk like a action figure. Now, while this is done a bit clunkily, and had he done this any sooner while the council weren't paying attention would have undermined Charlie's proposal, I do think this does fall in line with Angel's character that while he's a loser, baby, he doesn't want others to go down that same path. Sir Pentious is absolutely wasted, getting him to once again hit on Cherry Bomb to the point of suggesting they go have sex in one of the private rooms. He can't bring himself to explain why Cherry would have sex with him, getting Sir Pentious to blurt out that he's having sex with everyone. And then, with little reprieve, played out completely like a joke, a bunch of random clubbers take Sir Pentious, clearly intoxicated and against his will, into the room to be snoo-snooed. So yeah, this would have been a funny misunderstanding had not what episode 4 outlined as horrible breathing down this episode's neck. And it's very apparent that whatever praise I could give to the show, episode 6 was going to trample all over it. And yet, this is still not where the show truly jumps the shark, if you can believe that. Because the show really has to ignore that tone-deaf approach to its subject matter, we quickly go back to Angel proving himself virtuous inadvertently by way of noticing Valentino's presence at said club. Angel wants to nope the fuck out of there once he sees him, but Nifty has once again gone astray and going right towards Valentino. Angel catches Nifty, but not soon enough for Val not to notice him, gaining Val piqued to his fleet of fancy. So, if the tone deafness of Sir Pentious getting raped in the sex room wasn't already bad enough, this episode also had Val here to remind us of his arrangement with Angel. I'd expect crazy eyes from Mr. Deeds to hit the mark more than this episode does by this point. Anyhow, Val mistakes Nifty as being interested in his wares, and Angel isn't having any of it, cursing him and telling him off on any suggestion of his friends being involved in his shit. Val again reminds Angel of their deal, and Angel throws it back at him, saying that he can say and do whatever he wants outside of the studio. Val throws him aside, telling him that he'll repay Angel's indignity in kind tomorrow. Angel nevertheless is resolute, glad that he stood up to him, yet again a not-so-subtle through line to the proof of his redemption by what Adam clearly wrote. Through this, Angel suggests that Cherry could crash at the hotel, suggesting that Cherry is either a nomad or just simply homeless, but Cherry isn't interested, finding the life she has perfectly suitable for her. Although she does say that if Angel needs her for something that she'll be more than down, and that narrative Chekhov's gun will just have to be saved for episode 8. Anyhow, she makes a comment about wanting to fuck the next guy she sees, which in return Sir Pentious, who just missed his mark on being that next guy. Yeah, I'm glad this show continues to fiddle fuck with how we're supposed to feel about him being casually gang raped with his desire to fuck Cherry Bomb. It's not like that would be something that Angel Dust would take issue with or something. Anyhow, Charlie uses what Angel just did as proof of meeting the short list of requirements for redemption. Adam is flustered for a response, sputtering that if Angel did meet their demands, then why hasn't he made an appearance in heaven? With Emily and the council also curious as to why. In finally, comes a line that single-handedly destroyed whatever patience, whatever giving benefit of the doubt that I had for this show left.
Wait, none of you know what gets someone into heaven?
And because none of the council members can make a response, and Sarah, through gritted teeth, tries to make a weak justification for it, this ultimately means that Charlie is correct. Heaven has no fucking clue who gets to go into heaven. This is a line on a level of stupidity not seen since the Rise of Skywalker, where apparently the Star Destroyers on Exegol don't know which way is up. I feel this is so stupid that this doesn't need explanation, but you know what? This fucking show doesn't explain anything, so I might as well be the surrogate for it. So, given that Sarah already displayed disgust that Charlie sweared, looked toward Adam to come up with his requisites for who gets to go into heaven, and that even in ancillary media like Helva Boss makes it a point that an act of manslaughter prohibits you going into heaven, means that no, heaven clearly has a way to tell who gets to go to heaven or not. You can't have a clear line as to who gets to go to hell and never once think that doing the opposite of those things would allot you going to heaven. Unless Sarah is completely bullshitting and just doesn't want sinners to be redeemed no matter how virtuous, means that heaven has been, for thousands of years, just rolling the dice on who is allowed in heaven. I can't express this enough, but if fucking little Nicky is somehow beating you to the punch on what is moral or not moral, you done fucked up. And keep in mind, little Nicky was only using the setting of hell as a comedic backdrop for the movie. This show is using the entirety of hell as a central narrative point, and yet even that can't keep its morality consistent. Let's also keep in mind that, as a result of this serious revelation, that Charlie's entire precept of redemption is completely null and void, which means so much for that interesting premise of trying to redeem the worst of the worst. It just turns out that heaven is evil, guys. What a totally original and not overdone to hell concept. Is it any wonder then that Adam acts the way that he does and barely gets scolded for it? And here, I thought that the show thought it funny to make him an evil dumbass, but no, that is by his very upbringing that he is like this, which means when he says that the rules are black and white, that the show agrees by way of painting heaven this way and giving Adam the impression that it must be so. Except for when the fuck it isn't, like with Valentino, Alistair, Vaggie, Charlie, or many other examples that this show refuses to acknowledge because, with Reddit tier atheism in mind, heaven must be evil because my parents forced me to go to church on Sundays sometimes. But let's elaborate. Why did the show decide to go with this angle? Was it because Vivienne refused to put any hard rules as to what heaven deems sinful, as to not warrant the ire of fans who think that her deciding that homophobia is a sin means that she believes it too? That's actually quite likely, given that for all the talk of this show being edgy, that Vivienne regrets making a Jeffrey Dahmer joke in the pilot, because apparently her dense as nails fan base can't associate depiction with endorsement. Although, while cogent, doesn't square away the fact that Lute finds what Vaggie and Charlie have going for each other blasphemous, something she would only believe if heaven has deemed homosexuality a sin. So yeah, that 4chan meme may very well be in fact more accurate than we once realized. The second possibility is that the show writers sincerely and utterly believe heaven contempt in all manner, and exacerbated this by having their yearly purges indiscriminate and secret, while knowing full well that they could be killing those who could be redeemed. This is the most likely case, as Sarah seems flustered by her house of cards falling apart at the seams here, as well as a particular image of her in the second musical that will equally infuriate me, but for different reasons to vindicate that. The only issue with this that I can see is that it seems the other denizens of heaven aren't aware of the purges, nor the fast and loose nature of these rules, both of which deliberated by Sarah and Adam for extremely stupid and thinly veiled reasons. Regardless if the show is painting the entirety of heaven as evil, they still are confidently stating that the foundation heaven built its fundamentals on is built on a lie. And the third, and my personal reason for this, is that the people who write this show are fucking dumb. Occam's razor and foot and mouth, the writers had no clue what they were implying when Charlie stated this, nor ever considered the other things they clearly established as being sinful, while also admonishing the very sinners like Valentino who likely can't be redeemed based on their behavior. They wanted a hook for this episode, and by golly, they got it in the most destructive way possible, to the duress of everything else this show tried to build its own foundation upon. But whatever conclusion you make of this, any of these reasons are equally dumb for the show to establish. Now, from all my complaining, a lot of people will come to the conclusion that I would rather not have him be painted in any antagonistic light. They would be wrong, because what I take issue with is the way the show decided to make Heaven antagonistic. They could have meaningfully explored, or better yet, challenged Charlie's ideals of what redemption is to her, and conversely, the ideals of what Heaven finds moral or not. But the utter refusal to acknowledge any groundwork as to what Heaven finds moral or not means that it's a foregone conclusion if Charlie is successful or not. So even if any of the people she tries to redeem do get redeemed, it means jack shit, because the entire process is either unknown or just completely random. It may be even worse if Adam only got his place in heaven simply by being the first mortal man on earth and not by the virtues he upholds, further pinging the stupid villainy of heaven while adding selective bias as part of their redemption process. Lastly, before we get into the musical, I should mention that everyone is evaluating the degree of redemption based on Adam's hastily written requirements for it. If Sarah genuinely knows the means of which one would allot one to go to heaven or hell, you would think she would ever once pipe up that Adam's own morals don't align with heaven's. But the fact that she doesn't, nor do any of the other council members question his logic apart from, he's the first mortal man of heaven, means that Adam may very well be the first person in heaven to ever once inscribe these in scripture. Now, can you fucking imagine that? This utter clownfuck retard of a cretin was able to do in a few seconds that the Seraphim, and by extension heaven, couldn't in the thousands and thousands of years of their existence make a baseline for what gets you a pass into heaven. How utterly tragic that Adam of all inadvertently paved the way for this to even be considered, much less outlined. And I think that fundamentally puts into stark detail just how dire this show has become now. Emily opens in the song, "You didn't know," which, like with the rest of this episode, finds new ways to infuriate me. It has all the usual problems I have with musicals, and not only with the self-insistence that Hell's Greatest Dad had, but also this extremely self-righteous, presumptuous middle finger poised at heaven, as though the heaven they wrote as evil wasn't enough for them to get their licks in. Whether that be with Lute and Adam throwing in a slight reprise to Hell is Forever, which gets Adam to accidentally blurt out that they've been conducting these purges in secret to Emily having this completely warped view that the people Adam slays in hell are all innocent. Oh, and won't we get to that too? Or how Sarah tries to justify herself with a complete non-explanation, while the fire in the background are reflected ominously in her pupils. Before we delve into the equally infuriating duet that Emily and Charlie have, let's discuss all this. So, given what I said before, how is it only now that Emily, and by extension the council, discovered the purges were a thing? Even worse than that, Lute puts on the mask in the musical to illustrate that point, which makes me wonder how no one suspected a thing if Lute was keen on wearing her work clothes so casually. Secondly, Charlie confronts Sarah on her refusal to acknowledge any of this, with Sarah giving it a weak response of, "There are many things you don't know." Yeah, and wouldn't we love to know those things, huh? Because I get right clarified when somebody explains to me by treating me like a fucking idiot. Thirdly, whether Emily believes that what Adam is doing here is wrong, surely she would know that some of those sinners do deserve death, right? Surely, in spite of looking like a child, that she doesn't act like one. Oh wait, she's a splitting image to Charlie. Of course she does, because Charlie might as well be. So, with these two being two peas in a putrid poisonous pod, they postulate on the projector podium how perilous the pearly gates must be if hell is permanent.
If hell is forever, then heaven must be a lie.
Emily!
If angels can do whatever and remain in the sky, the rules are shades of gray when you don't do as you say, when you make the wretched suffer just to kill them again.
Using the melody from Hell is Forever against Lute and Adam, Emily and Charlie decree, with no exaggeration, that heaven is complete bullshit. All this, with no irony, comes across to me as someone who grew up in a Christian household with contempt for it and couldn't grow out of it, and found solace in this show to display said contempt in this manner. This isn't Emily and Charlie saying this as far as I'm concerned. This is the writers saying this on behalf of the heaven they wrote and they believe must function this way. Because the only way that Emily and Charlie could come to this conclusion is because of how vague the rules of heaven are, done out of incompetence, malice, or fear by the writers, and that Sarah chose to convene this meeting in spite of knowing full well there were no hard rules set in motion of who deserves to go to heaven or not. This is hardly the victory the writers think it is for them, because they had to severely handicap the competition to come to this result. Coming off as extremely petty, they had to stoop so low. The final stretch of this ass cancer of a song is that Charlie is exhilarated that as a result of this discussion that she has a council in turmoil with one another, before Adam and Lute proclaim that she shouldn't get on her high horse given the circumstances. And those circumstances are that they reveal to Charlie that Vaggie was an exorcist like them, getting Charlie to collapse in dismay. Welp, so much for trying to be remotely consistent with Charlie's character. It's almost like Charlie is simply flipping a switch to whatever is happening around her. I should also mention that it's weird how Charlie was happy that the council was at each other's throats despite needing their unambiguous approval of her plan. But seen as the heaven bad, hell good part of this show has finally shown its hand, they're going to run with it with every chance they get. Sarah resolves herself and deems that there is no evidence for sinners to be redeemed in spite of it all, getting Adam to cheer gleefully and state that when the time comes, he'll be hitting the hotel first. Yeah, we can talk about how planning a specific time and date to do these purchases is stupid once we get into episode 7, but for the immediate, how would attacking the hotel be logistically sound for the exorcists, considering at most they could kill like 7 or so people? Also, what about Charlie's pardon? Is that not in the cards anymore, or does Adam simply want to destroy the hotel on top of the patrons? Oh, silly me, I was thinking Adam had even thought of any of this, and not that he just wanted to be a dick. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and yet this episode still manages to find more ways to piss me off. So, Emily up to this point has been quite infuriating given the circumstances, but she manages to be just as head up her ass as Adam is by saying this.
How can I bring joy when I now know we are bringing misery to thousands of innocent people?
So when Emily said that she wasn't a child to be coddled by Sarah, I guess she's fucking wrong, because how in the fuck can you have this perspective knowing that Valentino exists without having the mind of a child? And she does know him because everyone was watching what Angel Dust was getting into, including, but not limited to, sticking up to Valentina. Now granted, she's saying this to Sarah, a dipshit herself who's only doing this to save her people from a uprising in hell, an uprising of which we never see nor is ever once meagerly expressed, other than when Velvet and the overlords discover the dead exorcist and suggests fighting back against them. Should I also mention that given that Sarah doesn't have a goddamn clue if the people she's trying to save are sinners themselves because the morals of heaven aren't written in stone? Yeah, kind of a worthless appeal there, you fucking dipshit, but God knows that Emily is equally as dumb for believing that all the sinners must be innocent too. And that, finally, was the end of episode 6, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Not in the quality of this episode, mind you, but how quickly, efficiently, and spectacularly this episode destroys any semblance of plot, world building, characters, or lack thereof for this show. It takes a certain kind of stupid to accomplish this, to the point that I have to wonder if this was a sabotage of the fundamentals this show was foreshadowing back in episode 1, or that the writers were merely delaying the inevitable corner they put themselves in. It was at this point that I knew I couldn't let this show go quietly into that good night in spite of my initial feelings, because holy hell was I flabbergasted at the sudden steep drop in quality this episode takes in relation to the rest of them. Even with as long-winded as I've gone on to this episode, can it really elaborate on just the frankly infinitesimal ways this show falls apart from how this episode delivers its plot forward, and will forever muddy the remaining episodes going forward. But surely it can't get worse than this, can it? Alright, so I have good news and bad news. The good news is that episode 7 is not as bad as episode 6 by comparison. The bad news is that episode 7 is the second worst episode in the entire show, so rest assured, this one has a doozy of problems as well. Anyhow, episode 7 starts off with addressing Vaggy's elephant in the room in a way that's not in the least bit funny nor insightful to her as a character. The hotel staff are basically coy with the notion of whether Charlie can even scrounge up a plan this late, and Vaggy still reassures them with the added subtext that Charlie has been fit to do so alone in their room. In said room, we find Charlie sobbing and bedridden, only being slightly compelled by Alistair's arrival and Charlie in a way that we've yet to see Charlie act. While I understand that Charlie at this point is emotionally vulnerable, even foregoing how easy it was for her to let her dad's abating of atrocities lie, but is this yet another example of Charlie acting out of character once more? Like in this scene where Alistair again mocks Charlie's self-loathing, despite Alistair presumably having come around to the idea of the hotel and of Charlie seeing Alistair's aims to make her dream a reality. She curses him by noting that all he's done is sit around and watch the hotel fail by stagnation, which he already was doing back before episode 5, but now Charlie decides to remember that for this episode in particular? This back and forth in turn allows Alistair to give Charlie a pep talk about the value of putting on a smile before Charlie again rants that she's at her wit's end to make this hotel work, which in turn allows Alistair to finally strike a deal when the iron is hot.
You want my soul?
Your soul? Heavens no! All I need from you is one itty-bitty favor. What's a favor between friends?
Charlie reluctantly makes the choice to make said deal with Alistair, uncertain as to what this favor may entail, and unfortunately that's a favor we'll only get further elucidation when and if a season 2 arrives, because boy does this show need more clarification than not with the pacing of it thus far. But also know that as a result of Charlie having not recognized Vaggy as an angel and everything else it implies, allows this deal to even happen in the first place. A whole slew of visual ephemera cascades the hotel from this deal, peculiarly, getting Vaggy in a panic to stop this. Vaggy is upset to find that Charlie made the deal of her own volition, prompting Charlie to impart what Alistair's knowledge gave her. Now, Vaggy says this,
but I didn't even know that was possible.
Which will become extremely stupid once we figure out the nature of how these angels can be harmed, and is stupid now because Vaggy knows angels can be harmed by the fact that she herself was harmed during the flashback scene. What's more is that it's odd how Charlie nor any of the hotel staff came to the obvious conclusion that exorcists can be harmed if Vaggy got here with lack of wings, and I, for one, gave me to wonder if Alistair's deal only told Charlie that they can be harmed despite already insinuating that they weren't invincible. Furthermore, had Vaggy told Charlie that she was an exorcist earlier, or that she or any of the hotel staff discovered it prior to this deal, means that Charlie wouldn't have had to make this deal with Alistair by the very simple deduction of the means of which Lute disabled Vaggy this way. But alas, I guess Vaggy got hit with the convenient Alzheimer's debuff that specifically makes it so you don't know how angels can be harmed. Which puts what Charlie says to Vaggie when she walks out all the more ironic, because it's not that Vaggie didn't want to say how, but that she somehow doesn't fucking know how. Regardless of the venom, Charlie wants the two to once again split up so that Vaggie can discover from Carmine how the Exorcist can be harmed, while Charlie needs all the help she can to stave off the purge. Well, given that Charlie is the princess of fucking hell, it should be easy with the 7 major vices to chip in, if for nothing else but to preserve the status of hell in any fashion, right? Oh, what's that? Mammon, Beelzebub, and Asmodeus can't go despite Helva Boss taking place in the same universe as Hazbin Hotel, as they're off limits to this serialized show? Well, that still leaves Belphegor, Satan, Abaddon, and most pertinently Lucifer to chip in, right? Oh, apparently no, that just can't happen, and that instead, Charlie needs to enlist the help of cannibal sinners of all things to defend her home motel. I know that Charlie has been characterized as too meek to command an ant to flee, but the believability that she has such little influence on hell that even in the interest of preserving it, that no one would want to help, not even her father, but we'll get to that in episode 8, don't worry. If we are to take Adam's threats in episode 1 and 6's earnest, is bordering on astounding. Well, this circumstance makes this episode run 2 B-plots concurrently with no A-plot to suit it, as Vaggie begrudgingly has to follow suit with his new plan in motion, while Charlie and Alistair go to Cannibal Town, yeah, real original there, to gather the troops. Vaggie tells the hotel staff that they're defending the hotel and that the angels can be killed, prompting the egg boy who overheard it all in episode 3 to pipe up, getting fingers to point at Serpentius who heard it months ago. His only justification to not take it seriously is...
What? They say insane shit all the time! How was I supposed to know this one was true?
While one of the egg boys says something ridiculous to vindicate it. Yeah, that doesn't excuse how, at no other time, did the egg boys spout this nonsense in the 5 fucking months they've been here, as, had he would make Alistair's deal pointless and given Charlie a reluctant contingency plan if the hotel doesn't work. And we're just supposed to believe he only said this now, or only to Serpentius in person. Well, what with the bullshittery that episode 7 is already underpinning, there is some levity to it, as Vaggie tells the staff that as a result of the hotel being made a prime target for the Exorcists, that she can no longer guarantee their safety, and that she essentially gives them the door to walk out if need be, as she only wanted them here to ensure the hotel's dream work and not be a casualty of war. This is quite decent characterization of Vaggie, that even in spite of how in the barrel she's been in, that she still wants to see Charlie's dream come true, and that she had hoped to avoid an inevitability like this happening. The only problem that I see of this is that even had Charlie's dream been made a reality, that wouldn't necessarily stop the purges happening, only that they would be made more benign. While Charlie and Alistair mosey on over to Cannibal Town, Charlie rants to Alistair about how frustrated she is by Vaggie destroying their trust. Yeah, sort of a meaningless gesture given how she was quick to forgive Serpentius and Lucifer for equally deceitful things, but you know, you gotta have drama for episode 7 that resolves within the same episode, don't ya? Anyhow, Alistair reintroduces to Charlie while reintroducing to us Rosie, the overlord of Cannibal Town. At least I think she is. Anyhow, the vibe of Cannibal Town is that everyone is nice in spite of their diets, exacerbated by Rosie's rosy veneer and appetite for all things humanoid. I can't help but think that with safe edginess in mind, that the aesthetic of this town was made to hand-wave away the notion of cannibalism in lieu of the polite charm that the town gives off, or more so, done as a way for this not to be a moral quandary for Charlie to enlist her help, as opposed to any other moral ill. Guess Rape City wasn't in the cards for recruitment purposes in this show, given how it treats the nature of rape so discordantly. The two sit and discuss the matter of Charlie coming here, and Charlie blurts in a panic that the Exorcists are coming early, directly for their hotel, and that they need an army to fend off the attack. How the information about the Exorcists coming early alluded to Rosie when she was at the fucking meeting with Carmilla discussing the extradition is astonishing, but as for the rest, Rosie acclimates quite well to the idea simply by Alistair vouching for Charlie. So, if it's this easy to get the help Charlie needs, again, where are the other deadly sins out deadly sinning against the exorcists? In fact, now that I think of it, why haven't any of the deadly sins save for Lucifer rose up against this before? Had they done so, would at least justify Sarah believing that hell was uprising, which we can get into the nature of the inciting incident of all this happening in the first place soon enough, but I imagine if Beelzebub's boyfriend got killed in a purge that she wouldn't take quite kindly to that and would send herself NA to Charlie. The only way any of this is squared away is that all the sinners in hell are still operating on the belief that Charlie has a hotel simply for redemption purposes and not as a staging ground to fend off the exorcists. But that still doesn't answer why Charlie never thought to broadcast his help all over hell, given that she has a guy that could very well do that easily. In contrast to Charlie's ease of getting the help, Vaggie is having difficulty even being on speaking terms with Carmine. Eventually, Carmine gives Vaggie a whole 2 minutes to explain herself, and Vaggie lets in that she knows that Carmine killed an angel, and that they need to know how in order to defend themselves from extermination. Carmine isn't willing to impart how on account of self-preservation of her own interests, with Vaggie countering that Charlie is in the interest of saving everyone, including her own people. Carmine suggests that it was Charlie who invited this devastation, and Vaggie retorts that Carmine doesn't know how desperate the leaders of heaven are into wiping them out, and that they either stand together now or die alone. Despite the convincing, Carmine isn't wary to pipe up and goes for a strike at Vaggie, and whatever else this scene entails will be better saved for later. As for the scene in question, I do like how hard it is for Vaggie to convince Carmine against her position, even if it's all on the basis that heaven will wipe all of hell out, which, again, if that's what they wanted, why haven't they done so before? A frankly broad reach of a conclusion to make, even if ultimately she's right. Back at Cannibal Town, while Rosie has gathered all of them in the town square, she tells Charlie that while she has her blessing, doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the townsfolk would be on board defending the hotel. So, in comes Charlie, who has to rally the troops with her Riz, and by skibbity she don't got it! Shitty zoomerisms aside, Charlie tries to rouse the crowd, but is constantly derailed by a heckler named Susan, who Rosie and Alistair preemptively told Charlie would cause problems for her, to the point that Charlie hilariously lashes out against her. Because the townsfolk apparently function like a hive mind, Charlie's outrage loses her grip on the crowd, and Rosie prompts a intermission to cool tensions. In stark contrast again to the last scene, Vaggie and Carmine are out duking it, with Carmine easily countering Vaggie, who just blind fourth charges right at her. I guess you could say her not using her spear was accounted for by Vaggie being incompetent at combat too. But anyhow, Vaggie, exhausted, ponders what Carmine is even doing fighting her, and Carmine says that she's teaching her to fight angels. And then, in comes a line that somehow makes the contrivance of no one else knowing that Vaggie was an angel even worse.
Wait, you know I'm an exorcist? How?
You have a giant X over your eye and wield an angelic spear. It's not rocket science.
So, if it's not rocket science for Carmine to reason that Vaggie was an angel, who, keep in mind, only knew of Vaggie in the few minutes she stumbled into her home, then tell me, writers, how the fuck did Charlie not, in the 3 fucking years she's known of her, the hotel staff who've been around her for 6 fucking months, or anyone who has come cross with Vaggie and Charlie when they were together, and shit, I was willing to almost forgive the contrivance that no one knew, so long as the show didn't explicitly make it seem obvious that she was by a character acknowledging it in universe. But now that they did, means that the writers committed the cardinal sin of writing, making a deliberate contrivance and recognize that you did in universe after the fact. And somehow this dialogue gets even worse, as after Carmine points out the obvious, she asks if Vaggie even knew that angels could be harmed, and Vaggie confidently says no. And I've seen a lot of cope from fans of this show that Vaggie was only saying no in relation to whether other sinners could harm angels, but if that is the case, means that when Luft left Vaggie for dead, means she had no confidence that Vaggie would be killed by the other demons if she and all the other exorcists believe they can't be harmed by them. Secondly, Lute would have only had angelic ornaments on her to go about crippling Vaggie the way she did, so shouldn't Vaggie already know angels can be harmed and how they can be harmed? And let's remember that Carmine only asks Vaggie if angels can be harmed bar none, not that they can or can't be harmed by X or Y. So this is writing the show for the writers as far as I'm concerned, and Sarah, you'll have to settle for silver, because as a direct result of Vaggie apparently forgetting how she wound up in hell in the first place, makes her the stupidest fucking character in this show. It also means that Vaggie's convenient forgetfulness of this gave Alistair the means to settle that deal with Charlie, a guilt that Vaggie doesn't seem to come to terms with because of her not spilling it to Charlie subtext-wise that angels could be harmed at any point. So basically, Carmine's criticisms of Vaggie's fighting style are weaknesses in the way that the exorcists fight as a whole, that they open themselves to vulnerabilities by their perceived invulnerability. And what weaknesses is key to defeating the angels, you might ask? Well, apparently, it's the very same weapons they use to purge the sinners in hell. Before we can delve into just how retarded that weakness is given what I know from Helluva Boss, we also have to discuss a brief flashback scene with Carmine, and in essence, the catalyst for any of this happening in the first place, that being the expediting of these purges. Carmine states that angelic steel isn't common, while showing us a battlefield chock full of them, with Carmine and her daughters fleeing from the last purge. In an act of self-defense of her daughters, Carmine fends off the exorcists and gives one a cut above the shoulders with her angelic steel-lined boots. And before the musical drivel assaults my eardrums, let's discuss the flashback and this revelation. So, this flashback is what I believe to be the inciting incident for the expediting of these purges to happen, as in episode 1, Lute remarks having found the body, meaning they already knew one of their own died and that their moving up of the purges was as a direct result of this act of self-defense. The problem with this, of course, is that we are to believe that at no other point in time during these purges did any of the sinners, even in a fruitless bid, dare tried to defend themselves from sinners, which is a complete sham if Carmine did, not knowing whether she would survive the onslaught or not. Furthermore, did heaven not expect sinners to save themselves from death such to the extent that losses may incur as a result? Because again, Vaggie's absence wasn't accounted for 3 years prior to the death of another? Apparently not, since Lute states that they've never managed to kill one of our own in episode 1, which I also find preposterous by the existence of angelic weapons, and with that, let's move the topic to that. So, in Helluva Boss, as much as this show tries to ignore it, established in Season 1, Episode 5, that angelic weapons are manufactured and express made to take out high priority targets. The problem made in that episode in contrast to this show is that contrary to the normal ballistic firearms presence in Hell are nigh ineffective to the likes of Stolos, and that angelic weapons are the only true way to kill one. But if that is the case, then why would angelic weapons be more profound if they are just as effective at killing normal sinners as they are overlords or even the vices of hell for that matter? And given the frequency of which these battle-laid weapons are present in purges and the manufacturing of such weapons causes more questions as to how not any of the sinners thought to use them during the purges, even if they believed it did nothing to the angels. This additional detail makes what Carmine said in episode 3 also vain, as she basically made angelic weapons a reality, and by extension, a war against heaven a possibility when and if the opportunity arises. As for the inciting incident itself, it's made me want to recontextualize what Sarah said to Adam in episode 6 about going with his plan. Now, I am to assume that Sarah only agreed to Adam's request to move up the purges and not the purges existing in the first place as a result of this act of self-defense, But given that Adam had to be hush-hush about the purges in of itself, and that Sarah explicitly stating that she only agreed to his yearly activities, makes my recontextualization bunkum. But had it been that way, would at least slightly justify Sarah's behavior as being extremely paranoid, or being told by Adam an exaggeration of the truth in order to get her along with his schemes. However, that again doesn't account for the almost blasé nature of the exorcists willingly dumping their own weapons for the sinners to use against one another, especially prescient with their usage in Helluva Boss for one, as though the sinners have acclimated to this yearly genocide as just another perk of living in hell. It would be one thing if the sinners were using these weapons back against the angels, but had they, means there wouldn't be incentive for the exorcists to drop these weapons for them to be used back in turn. And finally, the utterly simplistic and contrived weakness of the angels. I should mention that this weakness the show points out will be ignored for episode 8, so why even have that be established is dumb, but regardless, the manner in which the angels are weak to is made to allot their conveniently throwing away their weapons that much easier for our respective protagonists to fight back against them. And you would think this would be a weakness that the angels, or better yet, heaven, would account for, as to not let the very situation that Sarah was afraid of happen, would they not? Or essentially give hell the means of their own destruction so haphazardly that it's like some of the exorcists wanted this to happen? It almost makes me doubt Vaggie's sincerity of not wanting this to come to violence, and that her perceived ignorance of a weakness is just a facade of straying away from the final solution to hell's turmoil. Furthermore, in the retardation, if heaven apparently weren't aware of this obvious weakness the angels have, then how did Lute even confidently knew to use them against Vaggie? If heaven is aware of his weakness, then how does Sarah suppose hell could uprise against heaven, unless, of course, the exorcists, for completely stupid reasons, left their weapons behind during every purge? How did the executive decision to purge these sinners even occur if this was the only way hell could conceivably fight back against them, if there was no precedence for angelic weapons even being used against the angels? And why would the exorcists, knowing that they are weak to their own weapons, leave them behind if they know they can be used against them, and are doing these purges based on the notion that hell would try to fight back against them? Many a question unanswered, making the nature of the inciting incident and of the choice to have these purges happen all the more cannibalized. So, with all that comes Out for Love, which I guess Carmine was compelled to sing about how Vaggie needs to fight for the one she loves and not strictly out for vengeance. I'm sorry, but isn't that what Vaggie has done and been doing since the start of episode 1? I haven't gotten the impression that Vaggie was interested in redeeming sinners because she wanted to get back at the exorcists for how they treated her, even when her dirty secret was revealed by them. It seemed to me that Vaggie was wanting to avoid the possibility of fighting back against them and only begrudgingly caved as a result of all the contrivances leading up to this being the case. So yeah, this pep talk that Carmine is giving to Vaggie comes awfully presumptuous and abrupt as fuck as the musicals go. I suppose this musical doesn't have the same issues as the rest do, as Carmine is the only one singing, and it does have this salsa señorita vibe that makes it stand out from the rest, but as for it being a arc that Vaggie is going through, yeah, it isn't. The final kicker of this song exchange is that Vaggie starts to get in rhythm with Carmine such that her wings magically grow back. So I'm confused by this setup. Did she already regrew her wings and was just hiding them up until she gained the moxie to open up about who she was? Or did that musical quite literally heal them back to form and function? If so, shouldn't that mean her eye should be repaired too? Or is that too complicated of an organ to repair? I seriously don't know what I'm to take from her having her wings back here, or why it's even meaningful in the first place. I should also mention that in spite of Carmine not being convinced by Vaggie's proposal to arm her in the hotel with her weapons, the line that Vaggie says before we cut back to Charlie's B plot implies Carmine was. A bit odd, considering that Vaggie never once considered the possibility that if they do this, that war would break out, a concept a lot of characters don't consider when episode 8 rears in, or how easy it was for Carmine to be aired into doing so when her major reason for not telling Vestal or the Overlords the matter of which the Exorcist was killed was because of the possibility of war breaking. But again, the pacing is mile a minute into the last quarter of this show, so best not consider the narrative shortcuts they're taking. So, back to Charlie and Rosie. Rosie asserts that Charlie's outburst had more to do with the plight of the Purges, and Charlie asks what you do when someone lies to you about their true nature. Well, Charlie, maybe you should ask the Charlie from episode 2 how you dealt with that, or did we forget that Teletubbies-esque lesson on apologizing? Rosie asks Charlie some more details about the nature of this lie, and Charlie just blurts out that Vaggie was an angel and never told her to someone she's only known for a few minutes. Geez, I wonder if this would have fared badly if she told any other Overlord this extremely jaw-dropping reveal that would have got their ideas boggling with ways to exploit the Purges or something. Nope, can't even think of any, save for all the ones I'm showing on screen now. And because I just can't get enough of how much of an impudent child Charlie is, Rosie has to walk her through the basics of what she made the hotel for, how Charlie has no reason to doubt Vaggie's sincerity given everything she's done to help make her dream come true, and that Vaggie also would have her own reasons for not telling her, whether by the guilt of it all or that her guilt was what pushed her to see this dream come true. It bears repeating. Charlie, someone who has lived for thousands of years, who should know all this by now, is getting a reminder by a character she's only known for a few fucking minutes. Is it safe to say that Charlie has been emasculated to the point of being a diaper-shitting bedwetter, even more so than what episode 4 did? Rosie gives the usual spiel of words are cheap, actions are everything, while Charlie herself seems to just remember that Vaggie, even in spite of not wanting to arm the hotel, even knowing how upset Charlie was at her, was still willing to go through with the new plan. I get that this utter infantilization of Charlie was all in service to boost her morale so she can give a much more rousing speech to the cannibal sinners and in turn our second musical ordeal, but at this point, all I see is yet another character in the long line of hell of a verse characters being retold the same lesson they seemingly unlearnt, like Groundhog Day for the narratively inclined. So in, Charlie rizzes up the crowd with
Ready for this.
Yet another song that does slightly justify its own existence in universe with how Rosie wingman Charlie into singing her rally cry, as well as Charlie's own tendency to break out into song. However, it does break this potential fourth wall break with how Susan interjects in a way not to break Charlie's rhythm despite being a heckler earlier, or with Alistair's occasional lyrical notes, or how the entire town itself breaks into a musical cue as well. As for the song itself, it's basically Charlie psyching herself up to take the lead in the charge to fight back against Heaven, as heavy-handed, contrived, and spinning in the face of the show's initial premise is, along with the cannibals in turn. I should mention again, if I haven't done already, if Charlie has thought longer than in the immediate what this would spell for hell if they were to repel the angels and fell of their selves, because to me, she hasn't. Because when they say war, they're only talking in relation to the hotel versus the exorcists, not the entirety of hell against heaven, despite that being the likely result from this collective act of defiance. And seeing as Charlie got the troops and Vaggie got the weapons, I should bring up the logistical stupidity of the exorcists deciding a particular day and time for them to arrive. The only excuse for this is that Heaven doesn't want to skirt tradition by making the yearly purges be any random day out of the 365, but given that Heaven was already on board with expediting them, I don't see why this would be a issue. And given that the expediting came as a direct result of someone defending themselves from the last purge, wouldn't it be more advantageous for Heaven to deal their purges without a big red alarm clock to remind the sinners when to take cover or defend themselves? You know, keep them on edge and always second guessing, or better yet, if Heaven actually did treat hell like a diet purgatory, would actually make the sinners reconsider changing their ways if they knew that the possibility of being permanently dead was always on the horizon. But Because Heaven did decide a explicit time and day, something of which they for some reason let Hell end on too, means that if someone, or say a group of people, were to fight back, would make their work that much harder for no good reason. Anyhow, the two convene at the entrance to the hotel, with Vaggie wanting to clear the air while Charlie wants to hold that thought with giving Vaggie a souvenir from Cannibal Town. Vaggie is smitten by the gift and embraces Charlie, with Charlie also taking a gander at Vaggie's new wings. Yeah, I feel Charlie would have a lot more to say about the nature of how she got these wings, but whatever. They return to the hotel and find that the staff didn't leave and are in fact doing everything they can to fortify it, whatever that means, against an angelic assault. I want to like this scene so badly, but because we've had little interaction between the hotel staff to justify their decision to stay, this comes off as an empty gesture. And that was episode 7, a pretty bad episode, almost close to bad as episode 6, with the pants shitting acknowledgement of their own shitty contrivance, as well as the additional problems with the purges being spoon-fed here, Charlie's continued immaturity as the Princess of Hell, and who can forget how they suddenly made Vaggie swallow the idiot ball for no one else to hold in this episode too. So, with everything else that has been destroyed in terms of my engagement in this show, what is there left to destroy? I guess you could say the hotel itself, as we will see in episode 8. So, like with episode 7, episode 8 is not as bad as it, but still reigns as the third worst episode in the entire season, at least by my estimation. And nothing says that I'm prepared to watch some hot shit faster than the manner in which this episode starts, by having a montage of the hotel staff prepping themselves up for the next purge as Vox watches in astonishment that they would even bother fight. Yeah, Vox, weren't you apparently going to fight the sinners as Velvet mentioned in episode 3, or was she just blowing smoke up the Overlord's ass? Yeah, we'll get to the vicarious nature of the V's watching this all unfold soon enough. Of course, Vox is grateful that the hotel didn't work simply by virtue that Alistair may or may not get killed during this initial assault on it, a matter that should deeply concern Valentino regarding Angel Dust if I'm to believe that he's his best worker. But notably, he seems quite nonplussed about the whole ordeal or whether Angel would make it out alive, and while I do understand that with him being an abuser that he wouldn't give a shit, conversely, his frustrations about Angel in episode 4 were largely to do with Angel trying to find a way out of their exchange. You know, now thinking about it, I'm surprised we haven't seen an angle of the purges where sinners were willing to throw themselves at the angels either out of guilt of their past misdeeds or being put in a more perilous situation than when they were mortal humans. I wonder if that ever once crossed Charlie's mind as yet another complication of seeking redemption, but seeing as that is a foregone conclusion in this piss stank of a show, of course, the rest follow. Going on, Charlie sees her entourage of defenders and sees fit to remind the audience the same thing she said in episode 1, as though her wanting to make her mom's dream a reality wasn't already confusing given her interactions with her father. And well, we have a lot to say about her mom and the implications when we get that Marvel-esque post-credits scene. This is also to foreshadow that this episode also distinctly has many a Marvel quip thrown in too, because I guess it wasn't enough this show's bottom of the barrel, now they want to take inspiration from the likes of Disney and Gearbox too! While Charlie and Vaggie are anxious about the inevitable, Sir Pentious seems poised to assume the role of General for the onslaught, all done at his expense as a character. Again, we'll have much to say about him once his arc ends, but while I did say that I wouldn't get too meta with this show, I do find it conspicuous how much of a punching bag he is in this show that I do start to wonder if Vivienne personally hates him. Sir Pentious tries to ready a battle plan to Nifty, but she's not remotely poised for such a thing, prompting Charlie to give Nifty a angelic knife and stab at whomever is angelic. In the business, we yada yada yada, you know the rest at this point, for what will happen near the climax of this assault. Meanwhile, Vaggie states to everyone present, including us, that they have merely a day before the purge happens, compounding the frustration that I have with how often the episodes time jump between one another. As will also be consistent throughout, Vox is still watching all of this go down through means that seem incongruous with his need to have cameras in the hotel back in episode 2, as well as his initial concerns of Alistair striking a deal with Charlie, something he did in episode 7. But seeing as the V's are poising themselves as the antagonists for season 2, and given how this show thinks writing a compelling antagonist takes, am I really surprised Vox is no different to Adam by measure? Charlie makes a rally cry in a similar vein to Vaggy's, although with the added caveat of mentioning Cherry Bomb's presence here, as again, her presence will be important for reasons outside of her own, and with Charlie's continual insistence that while she didn't achieve redemption, at least they tried. Yeah, and the only two characters who tried in the entire season was Angel Dust and Serpentious. Did Charlie sincerely believe Cherry Bomb or Husk or Nifty were changed, or did she forget they were contractually obligated to be at the hotel? But furthermore, this appeal to get at the heartstrings of the audience won't work because, again, Charlie, and by extension the show, has had little time to engage us in the dynamic of these characters that she would feel this way. And I mean time, but what we actually see, not what would be implied in the 6 months between these purges. While the hotel staff have their drinks, Alistair has a one-to-one with none other but Nifty of all people, who the latter hasn't been much of a character, but just a little gremlin who happens to take space inside the hotel. While it is disappointing we don't get much more on what Nifty's deal is, both in regards to whether she's also tied to Alistair like Husk is, or why she acts the way that she does, she's ultimately inoffensive and by far the funniest character when the show attempts comedy. Anyhow, Alistair seems contemplative on the matter of these residents finding connection to one another here, to the point that Alistair himself is psyching himself up on whether he wants to be a part of that too. Again, foreshadowing, shorefadowing for developments later. Seeing as the hotel staff are comforting themselves for what will transpire tomorrow, we do get some rekindlement between some of the characters. Husk and Angel Dust have a affable back and forth, and Penches again tries to open himself up to Cherry Bomb, but still can't bring himself to it, awkwardly shying himself away. Despite these good vibes, Angel Dust manages to make an ass out of himself, especially given his proclivities, that Cherry Bomb could have sex with him, and makes the temptation juicy by mentioning that he has 2 dicks. Yeah, I wonder if Angel would take issue with one being objectified in this manner. It isn't like he's a sex slave or anything. Better yet, I wonder if this show would dare suggest something like this if the genders were reversed. And while you think the chances are low with safe edginess in mind, I think they are most definitely 0. This is also why, in spite of Angel Dust having the most characterization in this show, he is not the best one. And we can go into who is and why they are later. Elsewhere in the hotel, Charlie stands in front of a door and can't control herself with the crushing weight of who she might lose tomorrow and sobs uncontrollably. Vaggy overhears her and in chimes a reprise to More Than Anything to reconsole her fears. So did Vaggy also overhear when Lucifer and Charlie was singing about in order to match the meter and tempo of the song, or can all the characters absent of hearing the song just sing it when the show needs them to? Given the other fourth wall breaks that the musicals have done in this show, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Basically, this musical was put in to squash the beef that Charlie and Vaggy had about Vaggy being an angel without actually addressing said beef. Why Vaggy didn't tell Charlie, assured Charlie that Vaggy was completely sincere in her pursuits, Charlie herself assuring Vaggy that she still loves her in spite of knowing. None of that was addressed in this musical. And let me be clear, I am not stating that she just blanketly and quickly get over this with just a few words, but it's infinitely worse that they blanketly and quickly get over it without them. Sometimes telling rather than showing is more ideal in your story writing. Meanwhile in heaven, Adam gives his own pep rally to the exorcists present to prep them to assault the hotel, in the usual veneer Adam gives. The first marvelization comes in when Luke takes this assault to the nth degree, and Adam is perplexed by how graphic she got with it. And plenty more would come when the assault properly happens. I should also mention that the number of exorcists present here doesn't even remotely match how many would be required to get that 16% cut that Hell suffered last year, but again, math is a foregone conclusion in this show. The hotel denizens are ready for the Angels' assault, and the Angels themselves see. And while you don't schedule a specific fucking time to go about your purging, by way of Alistair projecting a barrier that crushes the Angels like flies on a windshield. Adam is a bit shocked by this defense because, you know, dumbass that he is, while Lute amplifies the dumbassery by pointing out the obvious. Also of note is that Adam notices that their angels are being felled by their own weapons, despite clearly being killed by non-angelic things, and finds that weak. And yeah, gotta agree, quite a convenient weakness for angels to have given their tendency to leave their weapons after every purge, you dipshits! But now that it is all but confirmed by Adam that the angels didn't even know, means there is now no precedence for heaven believing hell could ever uprise against them if they believed they were impenetrable to them. Seeing as this is the most fight-heavy episode of the show, I won't have much to say on the choreography as I'm not too knowledgeable about the strengths or weaknesses of such in this show. Instead, I'm just going to point out the many inconsistencies in which, despite establishing that the angels are only weak to their own weapons, are nonetheless getting killed by non-angelic things. Cherry throws some bombs, Angel shoots his guns, Serpentius fires off some cannons, and Husk throws his cards around. Unless I'm to believe that the angelic ornaments are so malleable in design that you can make literal cards out of them, as well as lace boots too, by Carmine's word. This is a contrived weakness that is now also contrived by them being weak to everything else. Adam is a bit fed up with the situation, and Superman punches the barrier through, allotting more exorcists, including him and Lute, to pummel the hotel. While this is going on, of course, Fox is watching like he's watching the goddamn Super Bowl, despite the existential threat these purges have established themselves to be in hell. I can't overstate this, but it'd be like if a meteor was crashing into Earth, and Joe Biden was trying to repel it, and Donald Trump somewhere was going, "Heh, Sleepy Joe, and his libtard America is failing. I've not been more happy, and believe me, I know so much about being happy that this is happening." Shouldn't the V's be either hunkered down somewhere safe, consolidating their resources, or better yet, have offered to help with what Velvet said back in episode 3? And granted, this is hilarious with the way that Fox Velvet thrusts in regards to what is happening, but only if you ignore that if the hotel fails and repelling, that the angels will get their number next. So Alistair and Adam have their first interaction between each other, which goes about as try-hard as you can get, with Alistair trying to get nothing personnel kid with Adam, and Adam being the clown master that he is. As they fight, they try to get into one another's heads, with Adam biting too hard the hands that feed this show with his edgelord comment, and Alistair pointing out how desperately arrogant he and all the angels are. Writers, please, I beg of you, just let them fight, and when one of them wins, then you can have all the monologuing you want, because it's not like these two have ever had an interaction between each other prior to this. Adam gets a one-up by destroying Alistair's radio staff, more like a wand if you ask me, and getting cut down by him. Before Adam can strike a killing blow, Alistair force quits faster than Wings of Redemption could, and dematerializes from the rooftop. What if Alistair's fate will only get redressed in the second musical, and I'm being extremely generous with that definition, later. Serpentius, by way of some kind of TACCOM, is alerting the hotel of who is attacking whom and from where, while Charlie is meekly defending herself from the exorcist as opposed to killing them outright like Faggy is. She manages to kill some of them by shooting off some magical fireworks, and again, am I supposed to assume she somehow conjured up angelic pyrotechnics with that move? Fuck it. This show hasn't been consistent with much, so like that matters. Like how Angel defends a egg boy from the wrath of an exorcist by riddling them with some TMPs, which lack the distinctive embellishments of angelic firearms we've seen a la Hell of a Boss. But hey, maybe despite this show being serialized by Amazon, who has as much fuck you money they could stomach, they had to make cuts in the animation department too? Adam starts finger blasting, pun intended, the hotel, with Charlie perplexed as to why Alistair isn't dealing with him, being overheard by the TACCOM Serpentius is holding. Before we go into what Serpentius does next, am I to assume that the hotel staff put the trust of just Alistair to deal with Adam as opposed to it being a group thing, because that's awfully selfish of Charlie just to put that responsibility solely on Alistair, and stupid to not consider a contingency if and when he fails. So Sir Pentious sees this all happening and realizes what he must do. He grabs Cherry mid-jump and plants a kiss on her, finally admitting his feelings towards her before heading off to commit a heroic sacrifice. He prepares his death blimp with all the staff just casually watching, as opposed to being distracted by fighting for some reason, and readies a shot, only for Adam to do this.
That could have been...
Now, even the die-hard fans of the show took issue with this happening, that it would have been a lot more meaningful had Sir Pentious traded his own life to severely wound Adam to give the hotel a fighting chance. That it seriously undermines this heroic moment for Sir Pentious to do this, only for Adam to vaporize him so casually. Furthermore, now knowing the capability of Adam to do such a thing, shouldn't he be using that ability all the time to instantly win? Or is Adam working off of video game logic where he can only use that move once and now it's on a indeterminate cooldown? Wow, yet another marvelization in both the mechanics of his power level and the dialogue he espouses once he kills Sir Pentious. As for Sir Pentious, while this is the end for Sir Pentious as a character, we haven't seen the last of him. What does that mean? Again, you'll know soon enough. Anyhow, my initial impressions about this show on first viewing was that I was coming away believing Husk was the best character, simply that he was largely the same as he was depicted in the pilot. But now, seriously considering what I've been subjected to, ironically enough, Sir Pentious is in fact the best character. Yes, despite being nothing but a doormat for the show's humor to projectile vomit itself forth, despite being characterized as utterly pathetic in his capabilities as a sinner and as a character, he's the best simply by the fact he's the only one who goes through a meaningful arc, even if said arc is thin. Think about it. He started off merely doing things out of his own benefit in a single-minded way, got humbled with Charlie's inexplicable forgiveness of his misdeeds, and over time had begun to look out for others unconditionally and chose to go out for his friends, even if he didn't know it would accomplish anything. The problem with Angel Dust as far as his arc goes is that he merely learns to take it up the tailpipe because others have to, and that he is incredibly inconsistent on how he perceives other people going down a path he's long since followed, whereas Sir Pentious' arc is fairly consistent with what we've seen of him. It's funny to think that in the interest of making him nothing but comic relief, that he comes back around to being the best character, like how MODOK from Ant-Man Quantumania was the best character of that movie, despite how much the movie tried so desperately to make him pathetic, like this show does Pentious. Well, at least the gang are upset to Pentious dying as opposed to when MODOK dies despite literally saving the multiverse in that movie, so that's something this show can shame Quantumania for. Anyhow, Charlie's sadness turns into rage from this reaction and calls forth Razzle and Dazzle, if you aren't aware, those are the two imp-like servants Lucifer gave to Charlie, to transform them into much more intimidating monsters for both Charlie and Vaggie to ride forth against Adam. Vaggie, you do have wings, do you not? Why do you need to hitch a ride to fight Adam if you know you can fly? Whatever, the show's pacing is at its breaking point, with Vaggie just summarily joining in despite being taken aback by Charlie's rage. Lute and Adam just casually watch as the two fly forth, again commenting on what is already the obvious, because I guess the fans are just eye-gouged by all that action that the motor functions to their brain don't work too good anymore. Luke cuts down one of the Azzles. Seriously, if the show didn't state who died, I could not tell you if Razzle or Dazzle died. That Vaggie was riding, plunging her and Luke back down into the central lobby so that the two can have their personal mono-e-mono. And I guess Adam and Charlie are just frozen in time as all of this is going down, no reaction or intermittent fanfare to go off on, or even a moment to breathe in the fact that one of Charlie's servants just bit the bullet. Yeah, the limits of this show being 8 episodes at barely half an hour each are really starting to show here. While the two ladies fight, Charlie just now decides to fly down only to be cut off by Adam, who pimp slaps her back onto the roof of the hotel. The choreography here is especially bad given that Charlie was flying toward the hotel, Adam slaps her to her right, and yet somehow Charlie flies farther into the hotel sign and onto the roof as opposed to crashing on the battlefield ground as she would. For once, Adam actually monologues before fighting a Charlie slumped on the ground about her willingness to fight on behalf of the sinners before opening himself to a blow by Charlie. Guess that's why you save your rewards on your enemy after you kill them, but what do I know? The fight that Adam and Charlie would have gets cut back to Vaggie and Lute fighting, with Lute currently having the upper hand. Vaggie only until now remembers she has wings and uses them to collapse some of the rubble of the hotel onto Lute. Feeling as though she's about to meet her end, Lute tells Vaggie to finish the job, only for Vaggie to spare her on an act of letting Lute live, knowing she failed to do when she had the chance. Again, this is in the business foreshadowing for what Lute will do afterwards. Vaggie overhears Charlie's cries of pain and heads off, leaving Lute to attempt to free herself from the wreckage, tearing apart her arm in the process. This will fare somewhat badly for Vaggie to not kill Lute later, but hey, at least Vaggie gave her reasons as to why, as opposed to the inexplicable reasons Lute left her alive last time. Back to Adam and Charlie. Like with the prior scene, Adam has the advantage and Vaggie tries to help, only being stopped short by Lute wrestling with her. It seems all is lost with all that is going on until Lucifer finally makes his appearance to help Charlie out, with his only excuse not showing up sooner being that he's sorry that he didn't show up sooner. So Lucifer, you are aware when these fucking purges happen, do you not? Did Charlie not tell you that the Exorcists were going to attack the hotel first? Like, seriously, what the fuck is Lucifer's excuse to not show up until it is narratively expedient for him to? Which means that now the deaths of Serpentius and Dazzle were pointless had Lucifer shown up sooner. And had he shown up any later, meant he would have lost his daughter too, the fucking dumbass. But hey, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And boy, does contrivances make up the gander of this show. So, with Lucifer here, the tides are turned with Adam losing more of his composure as Lucifer tries to sound like a badass with yet another painfully unfunny quip thrown before playing coy with Adam. He makes mention of tempting Lilith and Eve to cheat on him over Adam as a way to get more into his head, more so than when Alistair did, prompting Adam to pull this fucking move off where he splits the hotel and the ground beneath it in twain. So again, where was Adam pulling this move off before, or am I only to believe that his power level is only directly equivalent to his own anger? Christ, where was that when he had Charlie dead to rights just a few moments ago? Regardless, Charlie plummets nearly to her death from this destruction before Lucifer again catches her. Charlie is grateful but knows as Adam is charging at them and catches his Superman punch again to throw him down into the bedrock. While Lucifer had been playful up to this point, this attempt at a sneak attack is too much for Lucifer and he starts wailing on him mercilessly, only cooled by Charlie wanting her dad to let up on him. Honestly surprised that even Charlie would do this given how much of an ass Adam has been to her up to this point. Guess you could say that's her humility showing. While Adam isn't dead, he's effectively had the fight taken out of him as he starts to bawl out in a similar veneer to Handsome Jack's last words without nearly the tact or semblance that Adam believes himself to be the hero. And then the Dick Master himself gets penetrated from behind, pun intended again, by Nifty, coating herself in his angelic blood. All of this played off like a joke and to witness of Lute, who somehow was spared the inexplicable destruction of the hotel by him. While I understand that this is in line with Nifty's chaotic neutral attitude, this severely undercuts the potential to have any levity of introspection into why Adam feels the way that he does, other than that he has a massive chip on his shoulder about having partially allowed the circumstance of hell existing to happen. But I can't keep trying to fool myself to believe that Adam had any consistent principles or goals, nor even care when he dies knowing what I know about him. He was a clown through and through, and only when Lute turns Adam over that he even remotely has a smidgen of character as he weakly smiles upon seeing her just before he dies. And I'm sure when season 2 comes around that the V's will also be clown retards in their own right. I mean, they're already acting like that while all of this is going down, so the seed has been planted. Lucifer tells Lute to end this purge and gives her the opportunity to leave further unharmed. Lute grabs what is presumably Adam's halo before calling off the purge. So, something else that isn't ever outlined regarding this purge. How long does it occur? Is it time-based or only population-based? Because if it's time-based, then why would Luke find Vaggie not killing a child an affront to their ideals if Vaggie could still kill anyone else? How does heaven determine when enough is enough when it comes to the purge? It can't be population-based, since the number that Luke killed the last purge was impressive, meaning that there isn't a strict number that any exorcist needs to achieve. So could that mean that an angel could take part in a purge and not kill one sinner if they wanted to? Is there performance metrics regarding who is doing a shit job at purging? I'm thinking about this way more than the show ever did, and I'm just some dude working a 9 to 5 on top of doing this. There was 10 fucking writers who took part in this show, and not once was this considered, on top of everything else? Well, what with The Exorcist not only taking huge losses, but having failed in actually going about their purges, this is curtains for hell, right? War is going to spring from this because of this intense and vicious act of defiance by hell, would it not? Yeah, we can get into how this show doesn't get into that in a moment. Charlie is able to recollect herself on what is left of the hotel from the fight, uncertain of where to go from here with the state of things, and in comes the worst musical in the entire show. Even worse than You Didn't Know, and it starts with Sorry.
The show, it must go on.
Even me calling this song a song is being generous, because what it basically amounts to is various scenes of characters singing at one another as a substitute for dialogue, completely isolated from one another, spread thin across 3 good minutes of this episode's runtime. This isn't lyrics, it's dialogue with cadence, if you ask me, because there is absolutely no excuse that this couldn't be done with normal talk in the same or less amount of time while not causing this narrative disconnect as to why every character is singing. And this fundamentally puts into stark express why forcing your show to have a musical, even when it wouldn't fit, can damage the foundation of your show. So, the only way to tackle a musical like this is how I would tackle anything else, chronologically. It starts with Charlie feeling guilty for having brought this ruination upon them when she sees the battered remains of Sir Pentious' banner, believing that if she somehow convinced Heaven better, that this would have been avoided. Charlie, are you just as fucking stupid as Sarah is? Did you forget that Heaven doesn't know who goes into heaven or not, you twat? The whole process of redemption is a complete faux pas, because how can you redeem someone if you don't even know what you are redeeming? And assuming you did figure it out, Heaven wouldn't care, because by their own admission, it's entirely random. The only way you could even hypothetically go about accomplishing your dream would require a complete deconstruction of Heaven's current hierarchy, meaning war, you dumb bitch. But hey, let's not bring that up, despite this being clearly the result of such an act to do so. And may I remind the audience, this entire result was allowed to happen because one sinner decided to defend themselves. Utterly retarded. So in comes Lucifer to cheer his daughter up, remarking that Charlie has been the first in 10,000 years to cause a rollock in the system that both Hell and Heaven operate on. So that's right, folks, this show's version of Hell and Heaven is indeed going off of the Abrahamic timeline and not by the 4.5 billion years scientifically, meaning that for that long, Hell's sinners never once defended themselves, Heaven hadn't the faintest clue they were weak to their own weapons, and that neither had a strong baseline for who gets to go to hell or not. Isn't that just some inexplicable stupidity to go on for that long? Anyhow, Lucifer is now beset on making Charlie's dream come true by helping her, with the meager help of the other sinners around, to rebuild their hotel. Yeah, rebuild a hotel that, by and large, has failed to make its dream a reality, and by extension, held up by the false notion that there is a line in the sand on who goes to hell or not. It's just awfully presumptuous of Lucifer to state all of this, given his doubts in episode 5, as well as how little Charlie accomplished anything regarding that plan, as though we've had 3 seasons worth of building up this dream being a possibility, and are now actively gaslighting the audience and believing it so. While this musical montage meanders evermore, Vox and the V seem to declare that after this attack that they'll somehow be on top of the pecking order of the Overlords. I'm sorry, but how? Just because Alistair may or may not be crippled from the fight? And given that Vox supposedly has his tendrils in hell such that he powers their entire electrical grid, what more power could Vox want that he's supposedly missing? This is again awfully presumptuous from the V's, but even more so making it sound like this purge was so cataclysmic, it wasn't, that it somehow caused a power vacuum to form. But whatever, they're going to be the antagonists of Season 2 most likely, and most definitely will have as much depth to their antagonism as Adam did in this season. After their duet, we cut back to Alistair, sauntering over to what was left of his piece of home at the hotel. He's feeling quite disheveled by his near-death experience, as well as the notion that Charlie and the gang would find him altruistic if he were to die. For the first time, we see worry and panic in his face, mainly to do with the arrangements he made with someone and trying to find a way out. Given this is the last time we see of Alistair in the show, I have to say, the writers seriously did not know what to do with him. Is he good? Is he bad? Does he want the hotel to succeed or not? Does he have ulterior motives? Alistair became a perpetual mystery box of whatever the writers decide what he'll be, compared to his characterization in the pilot. Yet another Flanderization of his. While I understand that they wanted to coat Alistair under a veil of mystery, hell, even he states that, but it gets to a point where you obfuscate too much of him that whatever the reveal will wound up being more boring than when kept secret. The writers have also been extremely hands-off with his morality as a character, oscillating between him being just a chipper guy with unbelievable powers, or an actual force to be reckoned with who decided to hunker down at the behest of Lucifer's progeny. His sudden disposition change between episode 1 to 5 is indicative of such things. A guy who just wants to watch the hotel burn, yet also finds what Mimsy did in affront to the values the hotel holds? Maybe this might all come to a head in season 2, but if they haven't figured out what they want Alistair to be now, they might never figure that out later. Back to the newly reconstructed hotel, the gang continue to chant with Alistair making his reappearance known. A bit perplexing that nobody at said hotel even confirmed if Alistair was dead or not prior to doing this, but regardless, the song ends with a final motif of Happy Day in Hell, sung by everyone with the new hotel spangled in beauty. And I gotta say, it's quite poetic, isn't it? That this corporate, cynical, and frankly unfounded recreation of something would be built upon the grave of naive yet humble beginnings. In a way, it colors a very through line that Hazbin Hotel as a show, yeah, I said it, went from pilot to product. Something made with soul and vibrance reduced to nothing but a clinical shell of its former self. Something familiar, yet lacking the heart behind it. And that would normally be the end of this show, but alas, we got effectively 2 post-credit scenes to discuss and all that comes with it. Starting off, we see Sarah and Emily moseying about their study until Sir Pentious appears before them, getting a contrast of reactions from the two of them. Now, this might be quite warming that Pentious was worthy of getting redeemed from his act of heroism, but given that there aren't fucking rules as to who gets to heaven or not, makes this meaningless. But fuck it, let's humor this just one more fucking time. So, given that Pentious' act of heroism would have come at the duress of the purges happening means that if heaven were to treat a heroic sacrifice as virtuous, means they don't even care if the virtue would be done against them. Secondly, with the way that Pentious went at Cherry Bomb the way that he did, does that mean heaven can overlook a brief stint of sexual harassment in lieu of this heroic sacrifice? So, even if we were to assume that heaven has a guideline for who gets to go to heaven or not, Sir Pentious would likely not meet it. Furthermore, with the manner in which Sir Pentious appears this way, does this apply to all souls who get redeemed, hell or not? Wouldn't they start flooding the room by the thousands if we're going by the math of 8.3 to 10 billion souls getting killed yearly? And the fact that Sarah and Emily have these reactions means that this is the first time a sinner or hellborn managed to get into heaven, which I call a huge press X to doubt on that if we're to believe the process of going into heaven is seemingly random. Well, the whole process of heaven's morality is utterly fucked, no matter which way you try to look at it, so no surprise that it continues here. The final scene in this show is something I want to clip because there is very specific dialogue that I don't want those to assume I'm misinterpreting, so here it is.
Adam is dead. Your deal is done, and I'm in charge now. Your brat is threatening the very foundation of heaven. And if you want to stay here, you're going down there and stopping that bitch. You understand me, Lilith?
So, with that, let's get into it, shall we? So, if Lilith's proposed deal with Lute required that Adam die, how could Lute ensure that if she, and no one else knew how angels could be harmed prior to their failed purge? Secondly, why would Lute agree to such a thing if she had feelings for Adam in a manner that she did? And this is also assuming that the circumstances happened exactly the way that they did in the show, as had they been normally successful as before, means that Lilith's deal would have been off the table, unless the two of them had their own deals dependent on the circumstance. As for Lilith, if I'm to believe that she was such a threat to heaven that they mandated these purges happen, why is she out gallivanting in heaven? Shouldn't she not even have a pass to heaven given she was just a mortal woman, as opposed to Lucifer, a fallen angel? Furthermore, why would Charlie causing a rift in heaven spell problems for Lilith if she is just vibing on the beach? And if it does, means that Charlie's prior conceits of wanting to make her mother's dream come true even more daunting, especially prudent with Lute's insistence that she go deal with her brat. But all in all, this is just a cheap tease for what Season 2 may hold that barely scratches the surface of what Lilith's own deal is in this show, somehow even more obfuscated than Alistair's is. Speaking of, let us try to thread the needle of these two, as the coincidence of the both of them being absent for 7 years can't merely be a coincidence. So, if Lilith presumably struck a deal with Alistair in a manner that put him in a similar position to Husk, to him, given his remark, my only assumption about what the deal entailed would have something to do with the hotel, and that likely, Alistair was meant to sabotage what Charlie was trying to achieve under the pretense that he wanted to help. While this does square away Alistair's seemingly incoherent feelings about the values of the hotel, what doesn't is why now of all times to do so. Keep in mind that Charlie may have had pushed for this longer than when she first came across Vaggie, and perhaps even longer than the 7 years the two have been absent. So it beggars belief why Lilith would be compelled to make such an arrangement now if Charlie was no closer to achieving a goal that was frankly impossible from the very start. Furthermore, with Alistair's desperation to find a loophole out of the deal he made, was finding a means to make a deal with Charlie or Vaggie a part of that loophole. Because if so, why would Lilith strike a deal with Alistair knowing he would attempt such a thing as a workaround to theirs? Does Lilith care so little about Charlie that him making a deal with her own daughter irrelevant so long as the hotel doesn't succeed? And if I am to believe the two of them made this deal those 7 years prior, it also puts extreme coincidence in the manner that Charlie was able to form a defense against the hotel by what Carmine did the year prior, as Alistair's return had little to do with said inciting incident. Remember, he didn't even know angels could be harmed until the meeting in which Velvet made that knowledge clear, or even how they could be harmed until eavesdropping Egg Boy told him how. Had Alistair arrived at the hotel a year later, or a year sooner, means that the hotel would have still operated hopelessly without that intimate knowledge, and Lilith likely wouldn't even need Alistair to ensure its continual failure had not Carmine defended herself. But alas, this is all speculation, as fans theorize endlessly that Alistair may have struck a deal with Eve, or Rue, as he's called, and while the indeterminate mystery of Alistair's backdoor dealings will be the only thing this show didn't blow its load on too early, this being something pulled this late in the game will be something people will forget once Season 2 even comes around. And that, fellow residents, is the entirety of Hazbin Hotel, front to back. It dazzles, it razzles, it breaks its neck in breakneck fashion with all the visual noise and auditory vomit you could possibly intake. But underneath all of its glitter and glam is a show that undermines the initial selling point of its own story synopsis, barrels forth characters old and new with foot slammed perpetually on the gas pedal, going a mile a minute on any semblance of plot, lore, or lack thereof. And in its place, is a premise that hammers the already tired trend of heaven versus hell with the gravitas of one who thinks The Amazing Atheist is an auteur. Further pulled down by the musical by committee affair, morally discordant messages, and presumptuous, self-righteous indignance of it all, this show is a literal mess of someone who wasn't told no when to pipe things down in the ideas department. Maybe I was too harsh in insisting that this show is a cynical shell of itself, as it seems Vivienne was unwilling to compromise on anything with this show, whether it be the secondary or tertiary characters, or needing to lampoon a big fight at the end. Of course, that comes with its own downsides, like what you've seen here. Spaghettified media trying to do too much with what little time it has. That being all said, I do come away liking this show better than the Wednesday show, if for nothing else, that at least this show didn't cynically use the IP it was butchering to sell you something it wasn't, and that for what little moments in Hazbin Hotel that I did like, there was much more of them compared to Wednesday. So of course, what else is there but to discuss the themes of this show, as I've poised myself to do before? Well, that's the problem. How does one discuss the themes of this show when this show is so utterly schizophrenic on them? Is it about wanting to achieve your dreams? Is it about redemption? Is it about family? As overstated its welcome as that theme is. It can't even be the nature of tackling objective morality when it comes to heaven, as that would require heaven to have a baseline for what is or isn't moral. Something that could have been a meaningful exploration and criticism of heaven as an entity rather than the simplistic and reductive. A lot of the issues with tackling the themes of this show is a matter of the show itself being pressed for time to let anything breathe, as well as the circumstance of which it subverts its own story synopsis once episode 6 comes in. But we can discuss Charlie's modus operandi in a moment. While having the screen time of the Wednesday show might have helped the issue of this show's pacing, that would still require the show having any restraint on what it's trying to mold. More time would only cause more of an outpouring of every idea spring towards Vivienne's mind. No, there's absolutely precedence to have meaningful themes within a short amount of time, but too many and too little causes what happens in Hazbin Hotel. You can even see in the way that characters outwardly state the theme of the show or the conceits of its other characters, most clunkily displayed with Carmine's insistence that Vaggie is driven by vengeance, or the constant reminders of Charlie having daddy issues. And with that, let's discuss Charlie. So, Charlie's plight to redeem the sinners is the tether that which ties everything to this show, even more so than the inciting incident of Carmine having defended herself. So, knowing that this plight hinges on not only an unproven hypothesis, but of an impossibility given Heaven's rubric is astounding. Charlie made an entire hotel, got Vaggie swindled in, bribed Angel Dust as their control variable, and further convinced a gaggle into her plan based on nothing. Had Charlie been successful in one random strain, which how could she tell if she needs special permission to go to heaven, would at least excuse her reasons to go about her plan the way that she did, but knowing that she hadn't any prior proof, save for the progress she's made on Angel Dust, someone unreliable given the conditional nature of Angel Dust having even been brought to the hotel, is a level of putting the cart before the horse that I've not seen of a character motivation. I'm not saying that Charlie isn't compelled to want this dream be made real, more so in that the method and confidence of which she thinks she can make this dream a reality is absurd even from her own point of view. I saw a video by a YouTuber named Roaming Trend who argued that had Hazbin Hotel started with Charlie going into heaven and being challenged by Sarah to make her dream a possibility within the time the next purge occurs, would have inexorably fixed how idealistic Charlie is about her dream based on nothing. Furthermore, doing this would make Sarah less of a dumbass to even accept Charlie's terms, as given what she knows about heaven, would know Charlie would fail regardless of her attempts. And had Charlie managed to succeed, would also give Adam a reason to be poised against her, as Roaming Trend also suggests that if Charlie was successful, would convince Sarah to cancel the purges for good, something Adam doesn't want happen. But seeing as none of this happened, it causes issues in why Sarah would even entertain Charlie if the inevitable question would spring up about who's worthy of heaven, or why Adam would try to stop Charlie even pursuing this dream if he too knows there's no baseline. The only thing we can ask is where Charlie even got this idealism in the first place, and with that comes to the burning question about Lucifer. What is Lucifer's dream exactly? In episode 5, we are given a visual diorama of it, but what it means in the context of the musical is not stated, and the only other time this dream is redressed is in episode 1. The reason the angels push down Lucifer's dream may be in line with Charlie's, either way too chaotic or way too idealistic for the angels to accept. But given that Lucifer's dreams were thought of prior to the existence of hell, the purges, and of meeting with Lilith, means that when Lucifer was directing Charlie away from her goals, it was more to do with protecting her from further disappointment rather than chasing the same dream he did. This is all important because while I had surmised that Charlie wasn't willing to give up on the dream Lucifer had, now I have to correct a record in that Charlie was only spurned on because Lucifer had ideas bigger than the angels could afford making true. As a result, this paints Charlie that her wanting to stave off the suffering of her people may be more selfish than was let on, because ultimately, why would Charlie care about her people? Throughout the show, none of the sinners treat her with the faintest bit of respect or fear. Katie Killjoy can outwardly mock her without recourse from her or her dad. Valentino not only has little care for Charlie's position as Princess of Hell, but thinks that his job offer can somehow elevate her beyond her current position. Whether these are played like a joke or not, these instances make it as though Charlie is only doing any of this to prove her worth to Hell, rather than a simplistic, childish, and inexplicably moralistic worldview of being a goody two-shoes. That, while her father gave up, she won't in the purview of Hell, and now, her saying she'll make her mother proud now makes all the more sense, for all the wrong reasons. Charlie has no reason to stick her neck out for sinners with the way they treat her, where she lives, likely concluding that only power can warrant respect if the monologue she reads in episode 1 is to go by. And what greater power can you ring over Hell than to sign their very immediate fates with the purges, or even in the notion that she can change their ways for the sake of these purges? Granted, I don't think the show intended this to be the conclusion to make from Charlie, but now with all of it permeating in my mind, you can make a compelling case that Charlie is only doing any of this to hold a candle to her mother. But alas, this is me imagining a much more insidious and devious Charlie than the one we actually got, whom clearly has not considered the many obstacles of her experiment and acts like one would a character from My Little Pony when things don't go their way. And I'm supposed to believe that for this show having its mature rating, that it even treats its characters, its world, and whatever notions of theme it has in any amount of maturity. This is Zack Snyder levels of what one would think making your show mature would amount to. Lots of gore, plenty of swear word to shake a Christian to their core, vague nudity and sexual implications thrown around, but of course, without any tact, without meaningfully challenging the audience, and even when it does, has to add a disclaimer to keep their brow unfurrowed. Perhaps the worst offense that this show can muster to me, beyond the disrespect that it warrants regarding Christian mythology, the multiple contrivances and plot holes present, or its head-splitting pacing, is how it holds my intelligence in contempt. The show tries to make you think it's smarter than it actually is, edgier than it actually is, and more subversive than it actually is, expecting you to take this as a fact because of warranting the benefit of Vivian's older works as evident of that. Hazbin Hotel is hardly more challenging than the My Little Pony show that critics analogize to, and at least Friendship is Magic had the excuse that it was marketed towards children before adopting its adult audience later on. What is Hazbin Hotel's excuse to dial down the edgier jokes it had in the pilot, other than a acknowledgement that their core audience are incapable of delineating between endorsement and depiction? And at that point, that's all that needs to be said about this show. other than what Angel belabors in episode 2.
Wow, who wrote this?
And that was it, folks. Like with the Wednesday show, I was pleasantly surprised by the output of this series, and like it, a all-in-one version is on the horizon, with similar changes that I made in comparison to the separate 4-parter. Although now having anticipated me doing this makes it so I can write the parts in such a way that I don't have to cut any or as little dialogue as possible. Now on to the usual thing I do after completing these kinds of projects: what's next? You'd think it would be the Tales from the Borderlands analysis that I had initially planned after having completed my Wonderlands vid. Yeah, about that. So while that is still something I definitely want to do, what with the Borderlands live action movie just a few months away, I don't want to have my head buried in working on Tales only to find my attention diverted to that, as from just the premise of it to the casting choice is looking to be yet another hot mess that has dominated the Borderlands IP. Secondly, I may find my head also buried in playing the Elden Ring DLC when that comes out a month from now, taking away any time I normally relinquish to doing these kinds of projects. So in between when this final part comes out and the AIO version releases, I've wanted to focus on some smaller projects that I've spitballed in my head from my main affair of long-winded analyses. Of course, I was also of two minds of doing a long-winded breakdown of the Fallout TV show, but given that Mahler already released a video and Kritosis has talked about it at length and plans to do his own breakdown, I can't imagine my input will be unique without echoing their sentiments. Lately, I've noticed that kind of videos that I want to make comes from a place of noticing a untapped market of discussion regarding a piece of media and putting my money where my mouth is and picking at that untouched vein. While Cartoon Shy a few months prior made his own analysis of Hazbin Hotel, a bit odd that twice now he's beating me to the punch on a story I've wanted to break down, he's not as scrutinous as I would like him to be on it, as I've saw fit to do so here. And while I did make 2009 era reaction vids towards iDubbbz and Jim Sterling that doubtless many have done so, again, I had my own original thoughts about the respective videos that it didn't border on me stepping on the shadows of my betters. All this tangent talking is just to let you know what I'm going to get myself up to, as I have garnished the momentum from the success of the videos I released in 2023 and running with it, whether for better or for ill. As usual, these videos will have the citations in the pinned comment and in order of appearance, and if you like what you've seen or want to support me further, my Patreon is still up with a minimum and maximum $5 donation, which is only there to show your gratitude and will not be a way to gatekeep exclusive content of mine. Said Patreon also showcases the work that I do on DeviantArt, mainly photos and poems, with the occasional music review in my ongoing hubristic hipster hits series if videos aren't your cup of tea, which why would you even be on YouTube watching this if that was the case? I thank you for sticking for this long and hope that I can maintain your curiosity in what I'm making in future.